Plato's ideas have shaped not only the way we think about philosophy, but also the very structure of our societies, our understanding of the mind, and our pursuit of knowledge. Hello and welcome to another journey through time and thought. Tonight, I invite you to join me as we explore the legacy of one of history's greatest thinkers, Plato. His wisdom echoes through the ages, guiding us not only in our search for truth, but also in our quest to live with purpose and harmony. As you settle in, allow your mind to drift into the world of ancient Greece, where Plato's ideas first took root and continue to inspire us today. Let's uncover the timeless wisdom of this philosopher together in soft whispers as the night unfolds. Once upon a time, in the golden age of ancient Greece, under the clear skies of Athens, a child was born into a world of dreams and ideas. His name was Plato, and though no one could yet foresee the greatness he would achieve, the stars above seemed to whisper of his destiny. He came into this world in the year 427 BC, during a time when Athens was the heart of wisdom, art, and philosophy, a city where the gods themselves seemed to walk among mortals. Plato's family was no ordinary one. His father, Ariston, was of noble lineage, said to be descended from the ancient kings of Athens and even the god Poseidon himself. His mother, Pryxian, came from a line of statesmen and lawmakers connected to Solon, one of the great reformers of the Athenian law. Their home was a grand one, filled with the echoes of philosophical debates, political discussions, and the scent of olive oil from the nearby groves. Plato, though still just a boy, felt the weight of his heritage like a warm blanket, comforting, yet full of expectations. As a child, Plato spent his days exploring the streets of Athens, wandering through its bustling markets and watching the great minds of his time gather in the agora, the public square where ideas were exchanged like precious treasures. The city itself was alive with energy. From the towering Parthenon, which stood as a tribute to the goddess Athena, to the marble statues that lined the streets, every corner of Athens seemed to hum with a silent promise that here, within these walls, one could uncover the secrets of the universe. Plato's early education was, as expected for a boy of his stature, rich and varied. His parents ensured he learned not only the skills of a statesman, but also the deeper knowledge that lay within the arts, music, and, of course, philosophy. Teachers from all walks of life visited their home, and young Plato sat at their feet, absorbing their wisdom like a sponge. The stories of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey filled his nights, tales of brave heroes and vengeful gods, stirring his imagination and nurturing a sense of wonder. But Plato was not like the other boys. While others dreamed of glory in battle or wealth in trade, Plato's mind wandered elsewhere. He would often sit by himself under the olive trees, watching the play of light and shadow on the ground, lost in thought. What was the nature of this world, he wondered? Were the things he saw around him real, or was there something more, something hidden just beyond the reach of his senses? These questions danced in his mind, unanswered, yet persistent, like a melody he couldn't quite place. And so, even from an early age, Plato's soul was drawn toward the unknown, toward the mysteries of existence that lay just beyond the surface of things. He felt a deep yearning to understand the world, not just as it appeared, but as it truly was. This was the beginning of a journey that would take him far beyond the walls of Athens and into the very heart of philosophy itself. As Plato grew older, the city of Athens, with all its splendor and turmoil, became a canvas upon which he would paint his life's work. But for now, he was still a boy, standing on the threshold of greatness, his path not yet fully revealed. The winds of destiny blew softly through the streets of Athens, And somewhere, deep within Plato's soul, a flame flickered, a flame that would one day light the way for generations to come. As Plato grew, the warmth and wisdom of his family's influence shaped him in ways both subtle and profound. His household was not merely a place of rest, but a sanctuary of ideas, a place where ancient traditions met the ever-changing tides of Athenian life. His father, Ariston, though a man of noble heritage, was quiet and reserved, yet carried the weight of his lineage with a kind of silent dignity. He rarely spoke of their ancestral connection to the gods or the kings, but Plato felt it, this unspoken legacy that pulsed through his veins like a hidden river, giving him a sense of belonging to something much larger than himself. His mother, Pryxian, was a different force altogether. She was the heart of their home, strong-willed and wise, her eyes sharp with the clarity of one who had seen the world's complexity. She came from a line of lawmakers and scholars, and her sharp intellect was well known in their circles. In the quiet evenings, as the sun set over the city, she would sit with young Plato, telling him stories not just of heroes and gods, but of the great minds who shaped Athens itself. She spoke of Solon, their ancestor, who reformed the laws of the city and brought justice to the people. These stories, rich with wisdom and moral complexity, sank deep into Plato's young mind, stirring within him a longing to understand not only the world as it was, but how it could be made better. Their home was often filled with visitors, philosophers, politicians, poets, each one bringing within their own views, their own version of truth. Plato, even as a child, was a quiet observer, listening more than speaking, watching how ideas were exchanged like precious gifts. His curiosity knew no bounds. He asked questions that surprised even the wisest of their guests, probing into the nature of things, wondering about justice, beauty, and the soul. His mind, like a sponge, absorbed everything, yet his heart was not easily satisfied. There was always more to learn, more to uncover beneath the surface. It was not just words that influenced him, though. His family's status afforded him the privilege of experiencing the world beyond the walls of their home. His father took him to the city's great assemblies, where Plato witnessed firsthand the delicate balance of politics, the fiery debates that shaped Athens' future. These moments left a lasting impression, though Plato would later turn away from the life of politics, believing that the search for truth required a purer path, one untainted by the compromises of the political world. But it was his mother's guidance, gentle yet firm, that would leave the deepest mark. She taught him that wisdom was not something one could find by accident, it had to be sought with patience and persistence. In the quiet moments they shared, she would tell him, knowledge is not given to those who wait, but to those who seek it with all their heart. These words would echo in Plato's soul long after he had left her side, guiding him on his journey toward becoming one of the greatest philosophers the world would ever know. There was something else, too, something unspoken, yet ever present in their home, the idea that there was more to life than what met the eye. His mother often spoke of the soul, not as a religious belief, but as a philosophical truth. She would tell him stories of ancestors who believed in the immortality of the soul, in the idea that there was a deeper, invisible world beneath the one they could see. These ideas fascinated young Plato, stirring in him a hunger to explore the unseen realms of existence. And so, under the watchful eyes of his parents, Plato's mind blossomed. His childhood, though steeped in privilege, was also filled with deep philosophical inquiry, the seeds of which would grow into the profound thoughts that would later define his life. He was not just a boy of noble birth, he was a seeker, destined for a path that few could have imagined. His family, with their wisdom, their stories, and their silent expectations, had set him on this course, one that would lead him far beyond the confines of their home and into the very heart of the human condition. As the sun rose each morning over the marble columns of Athens, young Plato found himself drawn to the heart of the city, a place where the world seemed larger, filled with voices that echoed with the wisdom of ages. Athens was a city of contrasts. The brilliant minds of philosophers, poets, and statesmen walked side by side with artisans, merchants, and soldiers. It was a world both vibrant and tumultuous, where ideas clashed and merged like the waves against the rocky shore. Plato, still just a boy, wandered through the streets with wide eyes, absorbing every sight and sound. The markets bustled with life, the scent of fresh olives and baked bread filling the air, while the voices of traders haggling over their wares provided a constant hum. But it wasn't the chaos of the market that fascinated Plato. No, it was the discussions, the endless flow of conversation that seemed to fill every corner of the city. Men and women of all kinds debated everything from politics to the nature of the divine, their words flowing like rivers, sometimes clashing, sometimes merging into a single stream of thought. It was here, in the lively agora, that Plato first began to understand the power of words. He watched as philosophers gathered in small groups, their voices rising and falling like music as they discussed the nature of justice, virtue, and truth. Even as a young boy, he felt a deep pull toward these ideas, though he didn't yet have the words to describe what he was feeling. He knew only that these discussions, these exchanges of thought, stirred something deep within him, a longing to understand the world not as it appeared, but as it truly was. In the evenings, after the city had quieted and the streets were bathed in the soft glow of lanterns, Plato would return home to the warmth of his family. His parents, ever supportive, encouraged his curiosity. They provided him with the finest tutors, men of great wisdom who taught him not only the arts and sciences, but also the art of questioning, the true mark of a philosopher. Plato's education was one of depth and variety. He studied music, which was believed to harmonize the soul, and gymnastics, which strengthened the body. But it was in the realm of ideas that Plato truly thrived. His tutors noticed early on that his mind was not like that of other children. Where others saw only the surface of things, Plato sought to delve deeper, to understand the essence of what lay beneath. His teachers introduced him to the works of Homer, whose epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, were considered the foundation of Greek education. These stories of gods and heroes fascinated young Plato, not just for their tales of adventure, but for the moral questions they posed. What did it mean to be a hero? What was the nature of courage, of honor, of loyalty? These questions took root in Plato's mind, and though he could not yet fully answer them, they began to shape the way he saw the world. Yet, as Plato grew older, the world around him seemed more and more complex. The ideals of heroism and virtue that he had read about in Homer's verses didn't always align with the realities of life in Athens. He saw the conflicts and injustices of the city, how the pursuit of wealth and power often overshadowed the pursuit of wisdom. These contradictions troubled him deeply. He wondered, could there be a world where justice and truth reigned, where wisdom was valued above all else? It was this yearning for a higher truth that began to separate Plato from his peers. While other boys dreamed of becoming soldiers or politicians, Plato's dreams were different. He envisioned a world where wisdom ruled, where the soul's pursuit of truth was the highest goal. But these were not just idle fantasies. They were the seeds of something greater, something that would grow into a lifelong quest for understanding. And so, in the quiet moments of his youth, as he sat beneath the olive trees with a scroll in hand or gazed at the stars above, Plato's mind wandered to places beyond the world of men. He began to ponder the nature of reality itself. What was real and what was illusion? Was the world as it seemed, or was there something deeper, something invisible, that held the true essence of all things? These questions swirled in his mind, growing ever more complex as he grew older. But Plato was patient. He knew that the answers would not come quickly or easily. They would come, like the slow blooming of a flower, in time. For now, he would continue to listen, to learn, and to observe the world around him. In the streets of Athens, in the quiet of his home, and in the solitude of his thoughts, the young philosopher was already beginning to take shape. The world was vast, and Plato had only just begun to explore its mysteries. But one thing was clear: his journey had already begun. As the years passed and Plato moved from childhood into the early bloom of youth, his hunger for knowledge only grew deeper. He had spent his days listening to the teachers of Athens, absorbing the wisdom of poets, philosophers, and statesmen. But there was something missing, something intangible, like a melody half heard in the distance. He yearned for more, for a guide who could help him navigate the labyrinth of questions swirling in his mind. And then, one day, that guide appeared. It was a warm afternoon in the Agora, where the people of Athens gathered to exchange goods, ideas, and stories. The square was alive with the sounds of merchants haggling, children laughing, and philosophers debating the great mysteries of life. Amid this cacophony, Plato's attention was drawn to a small group of men gathered around a figure who stood out from the crowd, not for his appearance, but for the way he spoke. There, in the midst of the bustling marketplace, stood Socrates. He was not a man of wealth or noble birth, nor did he have the commanding presence of a statesman or general. His appearance was humble, barefoot, dressed in simple robes, with a face withered by time. But it was his voice that caught Plato's ear, a voice that was at once calm and powerful, filled with a deep conviction that seemed to rise from the very core of his being. Socrates was asking questions, simple questions, yet they seemed to unlock doors that others hadn't even noticed. "What is justice?" he asked. "What is virtue?" His words cut through the noise of the agora like a blade, sharp and precise, challenging the men around him to reconsider everything they thought they knew. He wasn't lecturing or preaching, but rather guiding his listeners through a maze of ideas, gently nudging them toward deeper understanding. Plato, still on the edge of the crowd, felt his heart quicken. This was it. This was what he had been searching for, though he hadn't known it until that very moment. Socrates wasn't just a teacher, he was a seeker of truth, a man who believed that wisdom could be found not through grand speeches or memorized knowledge, but through questioning the very foundations of reality. Plato approached cautiously, joining the circle of listeners. He listened as Socrates continued his dialogue, probing deeper into the minds of those who surrounded him. With each question, Socrates seemed to peel back the layers of false certainty, revealing the raw, unexamined beliefs that lay beneath. It was as if he were holding up a mirror to the soul, forcing those around him to confront their own ignorance. For Plato, it was a revelation. Socrates spoke not to teach, but to awaken something within his listeners, a spark, a flicker of understanding that could grow into a flame if nurtured. His method was unlike anything Plato had encountered before. Where other philosophers gave answers, Socrates offered only more questions, each one more challenging than the last. In that moment, Plato knew that he had found his teacher. He began to follow Socrates, sitting at his feet and absorbing his every word. Day after day, they would walk through the streets of Athens, the master and his new student, engaging in dialogues that stretched from dawn until dusk. They spoke of justice, of truth, of the nature of the human soul. But most importantly, Socrates taught Plato the art of questioning, the realization that wisdom is not something that can be given, but something that must be sought tirelessly through the act of inquiry. Socrates' questions were not meant to tear down, but to build, to create a foundation upon which true knowledge could stand. He believed that the unexamined life was not worth living, and Plato, now fully under his mentor's guidance, began to see the world in a new light. The simple, unquestioned beliefs that he had held since childhood began to dissolve, replaced by a deeper, more profound understanding of life's complexities. The days with Socrates were transformative for Plato. Each conversation felt like a journey into the unknown, a step further into the heart of truth. Socrates was not a man of easy answers. In fact, he often left his students with more questions than they started with. But that was his gift, the ability to make his students think, to make them question, to push them toward the discovery of their own answers. Under the tutelage of Socrates, Plato's mind blossomed. He began to see the world not as a fixed reality, but as a series of mysteries waiting to be unraveled. Socrates' teachings were like seeds planted in the rich soil of Plato's intellect, seeds that would one day grow into the great philosophical works that would define his legacy. But for now, Plato was content to listen, to learn, and to question. He had found his path, and though the journey ahead was long and full of uncertainty, he felt a deep sense of peace. With Socrates by his side, he knew that he was on the right course, a course that would lead him not just to knowledge, but to wisdom, the true light that guides the soul. Under the watchful guidance of Socrates, Plato's days were filled with more than just the sights and sounds of Athens. They became a journey inward, a quest to understand the depths of the human soul. From the moment he became Socrates' student, it was clear that this was no ordinary teacher-student relationship. Socrates was a man who did not lecture or dictate. Instead, he led Plato, step by step, deeper into the world of ideas, like a guide leading a traveler through a dense forest, showing him the paths that were hidden to the untrained eye. Each morning, they would meet in the agora, where the hustle and bustle of city life continued around them, yet Plato's focus was entirely on the words of his teacher. The sun would climb high in the sky as their discussions wandered through the vast landscape of human thought. Socrates, with his simple but profound questions, would open doors in Plato's mind, doors that led to new and unfamiliar places. What is courage? Socrates would ask, his voice soft but piercing. Is it the absence of fear, or something else entirely? Plato would sit quietly, thinking deeply, the question taking root in his mind. It was not the answer that mattered most to Socrates. It was the process of seeking, the act of questioning that revealed the hidden truths of life. He taught Plato that wisdom was not a treasure to be found, but a path to be walked, a path that required patience, humility, and a willingness to embrace uncertainty. Socrates believed that the world was filled with people who thought they knew the answers to life's greatest questions, but in reality, they were blind to their own ignorance. He often said, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." These words struck a deep chord within Plato, for he had seen this blindness in the streets of Athens, in the debates of politicians and the arrogance of scholars. Socrates' teachings were like a mirror, reflecting back to Plato the limitations of human understanding, but also revealing the boundless potential for discovery. Through these daily dialogues, Plato's understanding of the world began to shift. He no longer sought knowledge as something to possess, but as a flame that must be tended carefully, never allowed to grow dim. Socrates' questions were like the winds that fan this flame, keeping it alive and vibrant, urging Plato to look deeper, to peel back the layers of false certainty that clouded human thought. One afternoon, as they walked along the banks of the Ilissos River, Socrates posed a question that would linger in Plato's mind for years to come. "What is justice?" he asked, his eyes fixed on the gentle flow of the water. "Is it merely the laws that men create, or is there a higher form of justice, one that exists beyond the reach of our senses?" Plato thought long and hard before answering, but the more he thought, the more elusive the answer became. Socrates, as always, did not provide a solution. Instead, he smiled gently and said, "The search for justice is not one that can be completed in a day, nor in a lifetime. But the search itself is what makes life meaningful." In that moment, Plato understood something profound. Life, with all its complexities and contradictions, was not meant to be mastered, but explored. The questions were endless, and the answers, if they existed at all, were fleeting. But that was the beauty of it. To live was to seek, to constantly strive for understanding, even if the ultimate truths remained just beyond reach. Socrates' lessons were not confined to the abstract realms of thought, however. He also taught Plato about the nature of human virtue, about the importance of living a life in harmony with one's values. Socrates believed that knowledge and virtue were inseparable, that true wisdom was not just a matter of intellect, but of character. To know what is right, Socrates said, was to do what is right. Plato absorbed these teachings, recognizing that philosophy was not just a pursuit of the mind, but of the heart and soul as well. Their conversations continued day after day, as the seasons changed and Athens moved through the cycles of time. Plato, now fully immersed in the world of philosophy, felt his mind expanding, his perspective widening. The world was no longer a place of fixed answers, but a vast ocean of possibilities, where each wave carried with it a new question, a new challenge to be met. But as much as Socrates guided Plato through the labyrinth of thought, he also gave him the tools to navigate it on his own. Socrates never sought to create followers, he sought to create thinkers, individuals who could challenge the world with their own ideas, who could stand on their own 2 feet in the face of uncertainty. For Plato, this was the greatest gift of all. Under Socrates' watchful eye, he became not just a student, but a philosopher in his own right. His mind, once a garden of questions, began to blossom with ideas, each one nurtured by the wisdom of his teacher. But Socrates always reminded him, the journey is never over. Wisdom is a river that flows endlessly. We can drink from it, but we can never contain it. And so, Plato's journey continued. His days with Socrates were transformative, shaping the very foundations of his thought and setting him on a path that would one day lead him to become one of the greatest philosophers the world had ever known. But for now, he was content to walk alongside his teacher, to drink from the river of wisdom, and to let its waters carry him toward the unknown. The days with Socrates were filled with endless discovery, but as with all things in life, this season of learning was not meant to last forever. Plato had grown in wisdom and understanding, thanks to his teacher's relentless questions and gentle guidance, but the world around them was changing. The city of Athens, once a beacon of democracy and philosophy, was now gripped by political strife and unrest. The air felt heavy with tension, as if a storm were brewing on the horizon, unseen but inevitable. It was in this darkening atmosphere that the unthinkable happened. Socrates, inspired so many with his relentless pursuit of truth, found himself on trial for his life. The charge: corrupting the youth of Athens and disrespecting the city's gods. Plato, who had watched his mentor question the very foundations of Athenian society, knew that these accusations were unfounded, but the forces against Socrates were too great. The city that had once cherished its greatest thinker now saw his destruction. Plato sat quietly among the crowd during the trial, his heart heavy with a sense of foreboding. He listened as the prosecutors painted Socrates as a dangerous man, a corrupter who had led the young astray with his strange ideas and refusal to accept the old ways. But Plato knew the truth. Socrates had done nothing but ask questions that revealed the weaknesses in the very system that now sought to destroy him. When Socrates stood to defend himself, there was no anger in his voice, no bitterness. Instead, he spoke with the same calm, steady wisdom that had always defined him. He did not beg for mercy, nor did he apologize for the life he had lived. He simply asked the jury to consider one thing: was it better to live a life of unexamined certainty or to seek truth, even if that truth was uncomfortable? The jury, made up of men who feared Socrates' influence more than they respected his wisdom, found him guilty. The sentence was death by hemlock, a bitter poison that would end the life of the greatest philosopher Athens had ever known. Plato, barely able to contain his grief, watched as his beloved teacher accepted the verdict with quiet dignity. There was no fear in Socrates' eyes, only a deep, unshakable belief that death was not the end, but merely another part of life's journey. On the day of his execution, Socrates was surrounded by his closest friends and students, including Plato. The prison cell was small and dimly lit, but the mood was one of calm acceptance. Socrates spent his final hours in conversation, as he had always done, discussing the nature of the soul and the afterlife. His words were not filled with sorrow or regret, but with a quiet confidence that the soul was immortal, that death was merely a transition to a higher plane of existence. Plato could hardly bear the weight of the moment. As Socrates spoke, he felt a deep sense of loss rising within him, a grief so profound that it threatened to overwhelm him. How could the world go on without Socrates' wisdom, without his questions to guide them through the darkness? But as he looked into his teacher's eyes, he saw no fear, only peace. When the time came, Socrates drank the hemlock without hesitation. The room fell silent as he lifted the cup to his lips, his face calm and composed. Plato watched in agony as the poison began to take effect, first numbing Socrates' limbs, then slowly creeping through his body. But Socrates did not falter. Even as death approached, he continued to speak, offering words of comfort to his friends, reminding them that the soul was eternal, that they should not fear for him. With his final breath, Socrates lay down, his eyes closing softly, like a man drifting off to sleep. Plato sat in stunned silence, his heart aching with the weight of what he had just witnessed. The man who had given him so much, who had opened his mind to the vastness of the universe, was gone. It was a loss beyond words, a wound that cut deep into the very core of Plato's being. For days after, Plato wandered the streets of Athens in a daze. The city, once so vibrant and full of life, now felt cold and distant, its walls closing in around him. Without Socrates, Athens seemed smaller, its light dimmed. The agora, once filled with the voices of philosophers and thinkers, felt empty. Plato could still hear his teacher's voice in his mind, the steady rhythm of his questions echoing in the silence, but Socrates himself was no more. Plato could not remain in Athens. The city that had taken his teacher's life now felt like a prison, and so he made the difficult decision to leave. With a heavy heart, he packed his belongings and set out on a journey, one that would take him far from the familiar streets of his youth and into the wider world beyond. He traveled to distant lands, seeking wisdom in the temples of Egypt, in the teachings of Pythagoras in Italy, and in the mysteries of the ancient world. Yet, no matter how far he wandered, Socrates' teachings stayed with him like a flame that burned quietly in the depths of his soul. He remembered his teacher's final words, the calm acceptance of death, the unshakable belief that the soul was immortal. And though Plato grieved deeply for the loss of his mentor, he knew that the journey they had begun together was not over. It would continue, through Plato's own work, through the ideas he would one day teach to others. In time, Plato would return to Athens, not as a student, but as a teacher in his own right. He would found the academy, a place where future generations could come to seek the truth, to ask the same questions that Socrates had once asked him. But for now, Plato's heart was heavy with sorrow, and the road ahead seemed long and uncertain. Yet deep within him, the seed of philosophy had already taken root. And though Socrates was gone, his legacy would live on through Plato, through the academy, and through the countless generations who would one day follow the same path of wisdom, guided by the light of questions, always seeking, never ceasing. After the death of Socrates, Plato felt as if the soul of Athens had vanished with his beloved teacher. The streets that had once been filled with lively debates and philosophical musings now seemed hollow, echoes of a city that had lost its way. Plato could no longer find peace in the agora, where every corner reminded him of the man who had shaped his mind and opened his heart to the vast world of ideas. The city had betrayed Socrates, and in doing so, it had dimmed the very light of wisdom that once shone so brightly. Unable to bear the weight of this sorrow, Plato made a fateful decision: he would leave Athens. Not out of fear or defeat, but as a way to honor the spirit of his teacher. He believed there were other lands, other places where wisdom flourished, where the pursuit of knowledge was not shackled by politics or prejudice. And so, with a heavy heart but a mind still ablaze with questions, Plato set out on a journey that would take him far from the city of his birth. He left Athens with only a few belongings, simple robes, a scroll or two, and the memories of his days with Socrates. But more than anything, Plato carried within the flame of philosophy, a flame that had been kindled by his teacher's words and was now burning brightly within him. His journey was not just a physical one, it was a journey of the soul, a quest to seek the deeper truths that lay hidden in the world beyond. His first stop was the land of Egypt, where the ancient civilization stood as a testament to the wisdom of ages long past. Egypt, with its towering pyramids and temples bathed in the golden light of the desert sun, was a place of mystery and wonder. The priests and scholars of Egypt were said to possess knowledge that stretched back to the dawn of time itself, secrets of the stars, the earth, and the human soul. Plato walked among the temples of Thebes and Memphis, his eyes wide with awe at the grandeur of the ancient structures. Here, he met with priests who spoke of the eternal nature of the soul, of the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. These teachings resonated deeply with Plato, for they echoed the very words of Socrates on the immortality of the soul. In Egypt, Plato found not just a civilization built on stone, but a civilization built on the timeless pursuit of wisdom. He spent months here, learning, questioning, and absorbing the ancient knowledge of the Nile. But Plato's journey did not end in Egypt. From the banks of the Nile, he traveled to the lands of Italy, where the teachings of the great mathematician and philosopher Pythagoras still lingered in the air. Pythagoras, though long gone, had left behind a legacy of thought that fascinated Plato. The Pythagoreans believed in the harmony of the universe, that numbers were the key to understanding the cosmos and the divine order that governed all things. In the quiet villages of southern Italy, Plato sat with the followers of Pythagoras, learning about the mystical connections between numbers and the natural world. They spoke of the music of the spheres, the idea that the planets themselves moved in perfect harmony, creating a kind of cosmic symphony that could be understood through mathematics. Plato was captivated by these ideas, for they aligned with his own growing belief that the world of the senses was merely a shadow of a higher, more perfect reality. As Plato journeyed from land to land, from temple to temple, he gathered pieces of wisdom like a traveler collecting precious stones. Each place he visited, each teacher he met, added a new layer to his understanding of the world. But no matter how far he traveled, no matter how much he learned, the memory of Socrates was never far from his mind. His teacher's voice still echoed in his thoughts, guiding him, urging him to continue seeking the truth, no matter how elusive it seemed. Plato's travels were not just about gathering knowledge, they were about transformation. With each new experience, he grew, not just as a philosopher, but as a man. He began to see the world in a new light, to understand that the pursuit of wisdom was not confined to any one city or one school of thought. Wisdom was everywhere, in the stars above and the earth below, in the minds of men and the movements of the cosmos. But as much as Plato found solace in these distant lands, a part of him longed to return to Athens. For all its flaws, for all the pain it had caused him, Athens was still his home. And so, after many years of wandering, Plato turned his gaze back toward the city of his birth. He was not the same man who had left. He had been changed by his journey, deepened by the wisdom he had encountered. But now, he felt ready to return, not as a student, but as a teacher, with his own vision of the truth. And so, with the winds of destiny at his back, Plato began his journey home. He carried with him the knowledge of Egypt, the wisdom of Pythagoras, and the spirit of Socrates, all woven together in the tapestry of his mind. The road back to Athens was long, but Plato was ready. For he knew that his true work was only just beginning. After his time in Egypt, Plato's journey led him to the shores of Italy, where the teachings of a great philosopher still echoed through the hills and valleys long after his passing. The name of this philosopher was Pythagoras, a man who had unlocked the mysteries of the universe through the language of numbers. Though Pythagoras himself was gone, his followers still held to his teachings, carrying forward the torch of wisdom he had lit so many years before. Plato, ever the seeker, was drawn to the ideas of Pythagoras like a moth to a flame. He had heard stories of this mysterious philosopher, how Pythagoras believed that the entire cosmos was governed by numbers, that the universe itself was a vast, harmonious structure where everything, from the movement of the stars to the smallest seed, followed a divine mathematical order. Plato's mind, already tuned to the idea of a higher, invisible reality, was captivated by this thought. Could it be that numbers held the key to understanding the world beyond the senses? In the peaceful towns of southern Italy, Plato sought out the followers of Pythagoras. These men and women, known as Pythagoreans, lived simple lives, dedicated not only to philosophy but to the discipline of mathematics and music, believing that through these practices they could touch the divine. They welcomed Plato into their circles, sharing with him the teachings of their master. Plato quickly learned that, for the Pythagoreans, numbers were not just tools for measuring the physical world, they were symbols of the underlying reality that lay hidden from ordinary perception. The universe, they believed, was structured like a vast symphony where each planet, each star, and each living being played its part in the great cosmic order. They spoke of the music of the spheres, the idea that the planets, as they moved through the heavens, created a silent harmony, a celestial music that could not be heard with the ears but could be felt with the soul. This concept resonated deeply with Plato, for it mirrored his own growing belief that the world of appearances was only a shadow of a higher, more perfect reality. The Pythagoreans taught him that just as music was composed of harmonious notes, so too was the universe composed of harmonious patterns, and those patterns could be understood through mathematics. It was a revelation, one that would stay with Plato for the rest of his life. The more time Plato spent among the Pythagoreans, the more he came to see the world in terms of balance and proportion. He learned that the beauty of a musical chord or the structure of a perfect geometric shape was not merely pleasing to the senses, it was a reflection of the harmony that governed the cosmos itself. In these moments, Plato felt as though he had glimpsed something profound, something that transcended the physical world and pointed toward the eternal truths he had always sought. The Pythagoreans also believed that the soul, like the universe, followed a pattern of harmony. To them, the soul was immortal, moving through cycles of birth, death, and rebirth, much like the stars that rose and set in the night sky. This idea of the soul's immortality struck a deep chord within Plato, reminding him of the teachings of Socrates, who had spoken so often of the eternal nature of the soul. It was as if, in the teachings of Pythagoras, Plato had found a continuation of the wisdom he had first encountered in the Agora of Athens. During his time in Italy, Plato spent many hours in quiet contemplation, reflecting on the teachings he had absorbed. He would sit by the edge of the sea, watching the waves crash gently against the shore, their rhythmic motion reminding him of the patterns that governed all of life. The horizon stretched out before him, vast and endless, much like the questions that now filled his mind. What was the true nature of reality? Was there, as the Pythagoreans believed, a mathematical order behind the chaos of the visible world? Plato began to see that the answers to these questions lay not in the physical world, but in the realm of ideas. The forms and patterns he saw around him, whether in the movement of the stars or the proportions of a perfect triangle, were merely reflections of a higher reality, a reality that existed beyond the reach of the senses. This idea would soon become the foundation of Plato's own philosophy, his belief that the material world was but a shadow of the true world of forms, where perfection and truth resided. But Plato's time in Italy was not just about philosophy, it was also about growth. He realized that, like the universe, his own soul was part of this greater harmony, and that his journey of learning was far from over. The lessons he had learned from the Pythagoreans were like notes in a grand symphony, each one adding depth and richness to the melody of his own thoughts. Eventually, Plato's travels took him even further, to the island of Sicily, where he continued to seek out wisdom. But the teachings of Pythagoras remained with him, shaping his thoughts and guiding his path. The idea that the universe was structured by an invisible order, a harmony that could be understood through reason and mathematics, became a central pillar of his philosophy. As Plato continued his journey, he carried with him the seeds of these ideas, ready to plant them in the fertile soil of his own mind. He knew that one day he would return to Athens, where he would share what he had learned. But for now, his travels were not yet over, and the world still had much to teach him. The road ahead stretched out before him, filled with mysteries yet to be uncovered. And Plato, with the wisdom of the Pythagoreans fresh in his mind, was ready to continue his search for truth, knowing that each step brought him closer to the answers he sought, and that the harmony of the universe would guide him on his way. After his transformative time in Italy and Sicily, where the teachings of Pythagoras deepened his understanding of the cosmos, Plato's journey led him further south to the ancient land of Egypt. The land of the pyramids, the mighty Nile, and a civilization that had existed for millennia beckoned him with its mysteries. Egypt, with its towering monuments and timeless wisdom, was a place where the divine and the mortal intertwined in ways that stirred Plato's imagination and philosophical spirit. As Plato sailed up the Nile, the grandeur of the landscape filled him with awe. The river, which had sustained life in Egypt for thousands of years, flowed calmly under the warm sun, its waters reflecting the towering temples and the distant peaks of the pyramids. The air was thick with history, with stories of gods and pharaohs, of priests who had guarded the secrets of the universe since the dawn of time. Plato had come to Egypt not just as a traveler, but as a seeker of knowledge, eager to learn what this ancient civilization could teach him about the deeper truths of existence. Upon his arrival in the city of Thebes, Plato was struck by the sheer scale of the temples dedicated to the gods. Massive stone pillars rose toward the sky, carved with symbols that seemed to speak of an understanding that reached far beyond the material world. The priests who guarded these temples were said to possess knowledge that had been passed down through generations, knowledge of the stars, of the afterlife, and of the divine forces that governed all of creation. Plato sought an audience with these priests, hoping to learn from their wisdom. They welcomed him, recognizing in him a kindred spirit, someone who sought not the wealth or power that Egypt was famous for, but the deeper truths hidden in its ancient teachings. In the cool shadows of the temples, Plato sat with the priests, listening as they spoke of the soul and the eternal journey it must take. The Egyptians believed that the soul was immortal, that life was but a brief moment in a much longer journey that stretched into the afterlife. They spoke of the Ka and the Ba, the twin aspects of the soul that would live on after the body's death, and the trials it must endure in the underworld before reaching the field of reeds, the Egyptian paradise. Plato listened intently, for these teachings echoed what he had learned from Socrates, that the soul was eternal, and that death was not to be feared, but understood as a part of the soul's greater existence. But it was not just the teachings of the afterlife that fascinated Plato. The priests also shared with him their knowledge of the stars, the great celestial bodies that moved across the night sky in patterns that mirrored the order of the universe. They showed him how the pyramids, the great tombs of the pharaohs, were aligned with the stars, designed to guide the souls of the departed rulers to their place among the gods. To Plato, this idea that the heavens were a reflection of the divine order resonated deeply. It reminded him of the teachings of Pythagoras, of the harmony that existed between the cosmos and the soul. As Plato walked among the temples and studied the hieroglyphs carved into the stone walls, he began to see that Egypt was not just a land of physical monuments, but a land of ideas, of knowledge that transcended time. The priests spoke of Ma'at, the goddess of truth, balance, and cosmic order, who ensured that the universe remained in harmony. Plato saw in this a reflection of his own growing belief in the existence of higher forms, perfect, eternal ideas that existed beyond the physical world. In Egypt, Plato also encountered the teachings of Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing. The priests told him stories of how Thoth had brought the gift of writing to mankind, allowing knowledge to be preserved and passed down through the generations. This concept, that wisdom could be recorded and shared, struck Plato as both profound and essential. It was here, in the shadow of the pyramids, that Plato began to dream of a place where knowledge could be preserved, where future generations could come to learn the truths of the universe. This dream would one day take shape as the Academy, Plato's own school of philosophy in Athens. Plato spent many months in Egypt, studying with the priests, learning their ways, and absorbing the ancient knowledge that had shaped this civilization for so long. He visited the pyramids, those colossal monuments to eternity, and marveled at their precision, their alignment with the stars, their ability to stand as silent witnesses to the passing of time. In the quiet of the desert, Plato would often sit and meditate, his mind drifting to thoughts of the soul, of justice, and of the eternal truths that seemed just beyond his grasp. But as the seasons changed and the Nile rose and fell with its annual floods, Plato knew that it was time to move on. His journey was far from over, and though Egypt had given him much, there was still more to learn, more to discover in the world beyond. With a heart full of gratitude and a mind expanded by the wisdom of the ancient priests, Plato prepared to leave the land of the Nile. He carried with him not just the knowledge of Egypt, but a deeper understanding of the universe and his place within it. As he sailed away from the shores of Egypt, the pyramids fading into the distance, Plato felt a sense of peace. His journey had taken him to the heart of one of the world's oldest civilizations, and in doing so, it had brought him closer to the answers he sought. But there was still more to learn, still more questions to ask. And so, with the wind in his sails and the wisdom of the ancients in his heart, Plato continued his journey, knowing that each step brought him closer to the truth. After years of travel and deep contemplation, Plato felt the call to return to Athens, the city of his birth. The Athens he returned to was much the same, the bustling streets, the towering Acropolis, and the agora filled with the voices of merchants and philosophers alike. But to Plato, everything felt different. The boy who had once wandered these streets with wonder was now a man shaped by the wisdom of distant lands, a man who had learned the deeper truths that lay beyond the material world. As Plato set foot back in Athens, he knew that his journey was far from over. Though he had left as a student, he returned as a teacher, carrying with him the lessons of Socrates, the harmony of Pythagoras, and the ancient wisdom of Egypt. He was no longer just a seeker of knowledge, he was now ready to share what he had learned, to build a place where future generations could come to pursue wisdom. It was with this vision that Plato founded the Academy. The Academy was unlike anything Athens had ever seen before. It was not a temple dedicated to the gods, nor a school meant to train politicians or warriors. Instead, it was a sanctuary for the mind, a place where the pursuit of truth was held above all else. Plato's dream was to create a space where philosophers, mathematicians, and thinkers of all kinds could come together to explore the mysteries of the universe, free from the constraints of politics or societal expectations. Located just outside the city walls, the Academy was nestled in a peaceful grove of olive trees, a fitting location for a place dedicated to the quiet contemplation of ideas. The students who gathered there came from all walks of life, young men eager to learn, older scholars seeking deeper understanding, and even foreigners drawn to Athens by the reputation of this new school. They came not just to listen, but to question, to engage in the same dialogues that Plato himself had once shared with Socrates. At the heart of the Academy was Plato's belief that true wisdom could not be taught like a set of instructions. Knowledge was not something to be given, but something to be discovered through questioning, through dialogue, through the constant examination of one's own beliefs. Plato encouraged his students to challenge him, to debate one another, to seek answers not in what was comfortable, but in what was true. He wanted them to understand that the search for wisdom was a lifelong journey, one that required both humility and persistence. The academy quickly became a beacon of intellectual life in Athens. Students gathered beneath the olive trees, their voices rising and falling as they debated the nature of justice, the meaning of virtue, and the structure of the cosmos. They studied not just philosophy, but mathematics, astronomy, and even politics, for Plato believed that the pursuit of wisdom encompassed all areas of life. Each subject, in its own way, was a pathway to understanding the greater truths of existence. But the academy was not just a place for learning, it was also a community, a brotherhood of thinkers bound by their shared love of knowledge. Plato himself lived among his students, walking with them through the groves, engaging in dialogues that often lasted long into the night. He was not a distant figure, but a mentor, a guide who helped them navigate the complex landscape of ideas. One of the key teachings at the academy was Plato's theory of forms, a concept that had taken root in his mind during his travels. Plato believed that the world of the senses, the world we see, touch, and hear, was merely a shadow of a higher, more perfect reality. This higher reality was the world of forms, where the true essence of everything existed in its most perfect state. The objects and experiences we encountered in the physical world were simply imperfect reflections of these perfect forms. For example, every chair in the physical world was an imperfect reflection of the perfect form of a chair that existed in the realm of forms. This idea fascinated Plato's students, who debated it endlessly. How could one know these forms? Could they ever be truly understood, or were they forever beyond human comprehension? Plato's answer was that the philosopher, through reason and contemplation, could come to glimpse these forms, though they might never fully grasp them. It was a humbling thought, but one that inspired his students to continue seeking truth, knowing that the pursuit itself was the greatest reward. The academy flourished under Plato's leadership. It became a gathering place for some of the brightest minds of the time, including Aristotle, who would go on to become one of the most influential philosophers in history. But for all its success, the academy remained true to its founding principles. Wisdom was not something to be possessed, but something to be pursued, always just out of reach, always calling those who sought it to look deeper, to question further, to never be satisfied with easy answers. In the quiet of the academy, beneath the olive trees, Plato had found what he had been searching for all his life, a place where the soul could seek truth, where the mind could explore the mysteries of the universe, and where the flame of wisdom could be passed from one generation to the next. At the heart of Plato's teachings at the academy was an idea that had been slowly forming in his mind throughout his journeys and studies, the belief in a higher reality that existed beyond the physical world. This idea would become known as the theory of forms, and it would go on to define much of Western philosophy for centuries to come. Plato had long been troubled by the imperfections he saw in the material world. He had observed how everything in nature seemed to be in a state of constant change, how the seasons shifted, how people aged, how beauty faded. Nothing in the physical world seemed to last. Everything was temporary, fleeting, subject to the passage of time. This troubled Plato, for he believed that truth, by its very nature, had to be eternal, unchanging, and perfect. But how could such perfection exist in a world where everything was in flux? As Plato pondered this question, a revelation began to take shape in his mind. He realized that the physical world, the world we see, touch, and experience with our senses, was not the true reality. Instead, it was merely a shadow, a reflection of a higher, more perfect realm. This higher realm, which he called the world of forms, was where the true essence of everything existed. In this world, the imperfections of the physical world were stripped away, leaving only the pure, perfect forms of all things. Plato explained this idea to his students using a simple example. Imagine, he said, that there is a perfect form of a chair. This perfect chair exists in the world of forms, and it is the ideal version of every chair that has ever been made. Every physical chair in the world, the chairs you sit on, the chairs you see in homes and temples, is merely an imperfect copy of this perfect form. No physical chair can ever be as perfect as the form itself, but they all strive to imitate it in some way. The same was true for everything else in the world: beauty, justice, goodness, love. These were all perfect forms that existed in the higher realm, and everything we experienced in the physical world was merely an imperfect reflection of these forms. The beauty we see in a sunset, the justice we seek in our laws, the love we feel for another person, these are all shadows of the true beauty, the true justice, the true love that exists in the realm of forms. This idea captivated Plato's students at the academy. It was a way of understanding the world that explained why everything in the physical world was flawed and temporary, yet why we still sought perfection in all things. Plato's theory of forms gave them a framework for thinking about the deeper truths that lay beyond the material world, and it inspired them to seek wisdom not in the world of the senses, but in the world of the mind. Plato also used this theory to explain the nature of knowledge. He believed that true knowledge was not something that could be gained through the senses, because the senses could only perceive the imperfect physical world. Instead, true knowledge came from the mind's ability to grasp the perfect forms that existed beyond the senses. For Plato, this was the role of the philosopher, to train the mind to see beyond the illusions of the physical world and to contemplate the eternal truths that lay hidden in the realm of forms. To illustrate this, Plato shared with his students the famous allegory of the cave. In this allegory, he asked them to imagine a group of people who had been imprisoned in a dark cave their entire lives, chained in such a way that they could only see the shadows cast on the wall in front of them. These shadows were created by objects passing in front of a fire behind them, but because the prisoners had never seen the objects themselves, they believed the shadows to be the only reality. They had no idea that there was a whole world outside the cave, full of light and truth. One day, one of the prisoners is freed and taken outside the cave into the sunlight. At first, the light is blinding, and the prisoner struggles to adjust. But slowly, his eyes begin to see the world around him, the trees, the rivers, the sky. For the first time, he realizes that the shadows on the wall were not reality at all, but mere reflections of the true world outside the cave. Overwhelmed with this newfound knowledge, the prisoner returns to the cave to free the others, but they do not believe him. They are so used to the shadows that they cannot comprehend the idea of a reality beyond what they have always known. Plato used this allegory to explain his theory of forms. The prisoners in the cave were like people in the physical world, who only saw the shadows of reality. The philosopher, like the freed prisoner, was the one who had seen beyond the shadows and had come to understand the true nature of reality. The journey out of the cave, though painful and difficult, was the journey of the philosopher, the journey of the mind as it sought to leave behind the illusions of the senses and discover the eternal truths that lay beyond. The allegory of the cave was one of the most powerful teachings Plato shared with his students, for it showed them that wisdom was not something that could be handed to them. It had to be earned through struggle, through questioning, through the willingness to see beyond the surface of things and to embrace the deeper truths that lay hidden beneath. It was a call to never be satisfied with easy answers, but to always seek the higher reality that existed beyond the world of appearances. Plato's theory of forms became the cornerstone of his metaphysical philosophy, a way of understanding not just the world, but the nature of knowledge, truth, and existence itself. It was a philosophy that inspired generations of thinkers, from his own students at the academy to the philosophers and scientists who would come centuries later. Under the shade of the olive trees at the academy, Plato continued to share these ideas with his students, guiding them as they explored the vast landscape of thought. He knew that the journey of philosophy was never-ending, that the search for truth was a lifelong pursuit. But he also knew that, through reason and contemplation, they could catch glimpses of the eternal forms, the perfect realities that lay just beyond the reach of the senses. And so, the academy thrived, a place where minds could soar, where the search for wisdom was a way of life, and where the light of truth, though distant, always beckoned. After years of teaching and engaging in dialogues at the academy, Plato's mind began to turn toward the idea of justice. He had seen firsthand the political chaos that gripped Athens in the wake of the Peloponnesian War, and the execution of his beloved teacher, Socrates, had left a deep mark on him. Plato became convinced that the root of societal problems was not simply bad leadership or poor governance, but a fundamental misunderstanding of justice itself. He believed that to create a just society, one had to first understand what justice truly was. In his most famous work, The Republic, Plato set out to explore this very question. The dialogue, set against the backdrop of Socrates' philosophical discussions, seeks to define justice and to imagine what a perfectly just society would look like. Plato believed that justice was not just about laws or rules, but about harmony, both within the individual and within the state. Plato's vision of justice began with the soul. He believed that the soul was divided into three parts: reason, spirit, and desire. For Plato, a just individual was someone who had these three parts of the soul in harmony, with reason governing over spirit and desire. In other words, a just person was one who used their intellect to control their emotions and impulses, creating a balance that allowed them to act virtuously. Just as an individual could be in harmony, Plato believed that a society could be in harmony too. In The Republic, Plato outlined his vision for the ideal state. He divided society into three classes, each corresponding to one of the parts of the soul. At the top were the philosopher kings, who represented reason. These rulers were not motivated by wealth or power, but by wisdom and the pursuit of truth. Plato believed that only philosophers, who had trained their minds to see beyond the illusions of the material world, were fit to rule. They alone had the insight necessary to create a just society. Below the philosopher kings were the guardians, who represented spirit. These individuals were responsible for protecting the state, both from external threats and from internal disorder. They were brave, loyal, and disciplined, using their strength and courage to uphold the laws and maintain the peace. The guardians were like the soul's spirit, driven by a sense of honor and duty. At the base of society were the producers, who represented desire. This class included farmers, craftsmen, and merchants, whose role was to provide for the material needs of the state. They were the foundation of the economy, producing the goods and services that allowed the state to function. While the producers were driven by their desires for wealth and comfort, Plato believed that this was not a negative thing, as long as their desires were kept in check by the wisdom of the philosopher kings and the discipline of the guardians. In Plato's ideal state, each class played its part, just as each part of the soul played its role in the individual. The philosopher kings ruled with wisdom, the guardians defended with courage, and the producers worked with diligence. Together, They created a society in which each person could achieve their full potential, and in which justice was not merely a matter of laws, but of balance and harmony. But Plato's vision of the ideal state was not just about the organization of society, it was also about education. In the Republic, Plato outlined a rigorous system of education designed to produce philosopher kings. This education began in childhood and continued well into adulthood, focusing not only on intellectual development but also on physical training, music, and ethics. Plato believed that education was the key to creating just individuals and, by extension, a just society. One of the most famous ideas from the Republic is the allegory of the cave, which Plato used to illustrate the philosopher's journey toward knowledge. In this allegory, Plato compared the philosopher's search for truth to a prisoner escaping from a dark cave. Inside the cave, the prisoners are chained and can only see shadows cast on the wall by objects passing in front of a fire. These shadows are all they know, and they believe them to be the only reality. But one prisoner breaks free and is able to leave the cave. At first, the light of the sun is blinding, and the prisoner struggles to understand what he is seeing. Slowly, however, he begins to see the true world, the trees, the rivers, the sky. He realizes that the shadows in the cave were not reality at all, but mere illusions. The philosopher, Plato argued, is like this prisoner. He escapes the world of appearances and illusions to see the truth of the forms, the perfect realities that lie beyond the physical world. Once the philosopher has seen the truth, Plato believed he has a duty to return to the cave and help others escape. This, for Plato, was the role of the philosopher king. The philosopher's duty was not just to seek knowledge for its own sake, but to use that knowledge to guide and govern society. Yet, despite his belief in the philosopher king as the ideal ruler, Plato was not naive about the difficulties of achieving such a society. In the Republic, he acknowledged that most people would resist the philosopher's attempts to enlighten them. Just as the prisoners in the cave resisted the free prisoner's attempt to show them the truth, so too would people resist the philosopher's attempts to bring them wisdom. Plato knew that creating a just society was a difficult, perhaps even impossible, task. But he believed that it was a task worth pursuing nonetheless. In his later work, The Laws, Plato offered a more pragmatic vision of governance. While the Republic had been an exploration of an ideal, utopian society, The Laws was concerned with how a real-world society could be structured. In this later dialogue, Plato proposed a system of government that combined elements of monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy in an attempt to create a balanced and stable state. Though he still held that philosophers were the best rulers, he acknowledged that in the real world, compromises had to be made. Plato's vision of justice and the ideal state has influenced countless thinkers throughout history. His belief in the importance of education, the value of wisdom in leadership, and the idea that justice is a matter of harmony and balance continue to resonate today. Though his ideal state may never have been realized, Plato's ideas have left a lasting legacy, shaping the way we think about justice, government, and the role of philosophy in society. As Plato entered the later years of his life, his influence had already spread far beyond the olive groves of the Academy. The Academy itself had grown into a renowned center of learning, attracting students from across the Greek world. Philosophers, mathematicians, politicians, and artists came to learn from Plato and his teachings, eager to engage in the dialogues and debates that had become the lifeblood of the Academy. Yet, even in these final days, Plato remained devoted to his work, continuing to teach, write, and reflect on the nature of existence, knowledge, and justice. Despite his growing age, Plato's mind remained sharp, filled with questions that still needed answers. His later works, such as the Laws, reflect a philosopher who was not only deeply idealistic but also pragmatic, grappling with the complexities of human nature and governance. In the Laws, Plato acknowledged that the perfect society he had envisioned in the Republic might never be realized. Instead, he proposed a more practical system of governance, one that took into account the imperfect nature of human beings and sought to create balance and order within the constraints of reality. But even as he considered the limits of human society, Plato's dreams of a just and harmonious world never faded. He continued to believe that education, reason, and the pursuit of truth were the keys to building a better society. The Academy was the embodiment of this vision, a place where young minds could be shaped, where wisdom could be cultivated, and where the seeds of a more just world could be sown. As Plato's life drew to a close, he was surrounded by students and followers who had been profoundly shaped by his teachings. Among them was Aristotle, who would go on to become one of the most influential philosophers in history, carrying forward the torch of wisdom that Plato had lit. The relationship between Plato and Aristotle was complex. While Aristotle admired his teacher, he also challenged many of Plato's ideas, setting the stage for a new era of philosophical thought. Plato died in 347 BCE, at the age of 80. His passing marked the end of a remarkable life, one that had been dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge and the search for truth. Yet, even in death, Plato's influence did not wane. The Academy continued to thrive long after his death, becoming one of the most important institutions of learning in the ancient world. For centuries, it would serve as a beacon of intellectual life, attracting scholars from across the Mediterranean and preserving Plato's teachings for future generations. Plato's death was not the end of his story. His ideas, immortalized in the dialogues he had written throughout his life, continued to shape the minds of those who came after him. From the halls of the Academy to the courts of kings, from the writings of later philosophers to the teachings of modern universities, Plato's legacy endured. His thoughts on justice, knowledge, virtue, and the nature of reality became the foundation of Western philosophy, influencing countless thinkers from antiquity to the present day. Perhaps one of Plato's greatest legacies was his belief in the power of the mind to transcend the material world. Through his theory of forms, Plato had argued that the world we experience with our senses was not the ultimate reality, but a shadow of a higher, more perfect realm. This idea would inspire generations of philosophers, scientists, and theologians to seek answers beyond the physical, to question the nature of existence, and to explore the mysteries of the universe with both reason and wonder. In the centuries following Plato's death, his works were preserved, studied, and debated by scholars from every corner of the ancient world. The Academy itself remained a center of learning for nearly 900 years, until it was finally closed by the Byzantine Emperor Justinian in 529 CE. Even then, the spirit of Plato's teachings lived on, carried by the scholars who had been shaped by his wisdom and who would pass it on to future generations. Plato's influence extended far beyond the realm of philosophy. His ideas about justice and governance inspired political leaders throughout history, from the philosopher kings of ancient Greece to the founding fathers of modern democracies. His belief in the importance of education became a cornerstone of Western civilization, shaping the way we think about learning, knowledge, and the role of the teacher. And his commitment to the search for truth continues to inspire scientists, scholars, and thinkers of all kinds to this day. In many ways, Plato's life was a testament to the power of ideas. Though he never held political office, never led an army, and never ruled a nation, his thoughts and writings had a profound impact on the course of history. Plato understood that ideas had the power to change the world, not through force or conquest, but through the slow, steady process of shaping minds and hearts. As the centuries passed, Plato's reputation only grew. His works were translated into countless languages, studied by scholars in every age, and revered as some of the greatest writings in the history of human thought. Today, Plato is remembered not just as a philosopher, but as a visionary, a man who dared to imagine a world governed by wisdom and justice, where truth was the highest goal and the pursuit of knowledge was a lifelong journey. Even in the modern world, Plato's ideas continue to resonate. His dialogues are still read and studied in universities. His vision of justice continues to inspire debates in political theory, and his belief in the power of education remains as relevant as ever. Plato's life may have ended more than 2 millennia ago, but his legacy lives on, a testament to the enduring power of philosophy to shape the course of history. As the sun set on the Academy for the last time, the legacy of Plato remained bright, a light that would continue to guide future generations on their own journeys toward truth, wisdom, and justice. Plato's death marked the end of his life, but it was only the beginning of his profound influence on the world. His ideas, immortalized in his writings, echoed through the ages, touching the minds of philosophers, scholars, and leaders in every corner of the ancient world and beyond. From his students at the Academy to the thinkers of the Renaissance, Plato's legacy was one of the most enduring in the history of philosophy. His vision of truth, justice, and the nature of reality became the foundation upon which much of Western thought was built. One of the most significant figures to be influenced by Plato was his own student, Aristotle. Although Aristotle would later challenge many of his teacher's ideas, the foundation of his thought was undeniably Platonic. Aristotle was a brilliant student at the Academy, and his time there shaped his approach to philosophy. He would go on to develop his own theories, focusing more on the empirical world than on Plato's realm of forms, yet he always remained in dialogue with Plato's ideas. Aristotle's works on ethics, politics, metaphysics, and logic were deeply intertwined with the questions Plato had posed, and their relationship became one of the most famous teacher-student dynamics in history. As the centuries passed, Plato's influence extended beyond the borders of Greece. His works were studied by philosophers in the Hellenistic period, including the Stoics and the Skeptics, who each took Plato's ideas and adapted them to their own worldviews. The Stoics, in particular, were fascinated by Plato's emphasis on reason and the idea of living in accordance with nature. While they did not fully accept Plato's theory of forms, they shared his belief in the importance of virtue and wisdom as the highest goods. In the Roman world, Cicero, one of the most famous orators and philosophers of his time, regarded Plato with great reverence. Cicero often referred to Plato as divine, and his own writings on justice and the role of the state were heavily influenced by Plato's ideas in the Republic. Cicero believed that Plato's vision of a just society, ruled by philosopher kings, was the highest ideal, even if it seemed unattainable in practice. He adopted many of Plato's concepts of morality and civic duty, weaving them into the fabric of Roman political and philosophical thought. As the ancient world gave way to the Middle Ages, Plato's influence did not wane. In fact, his works were rediscovered and revered by scholars in the Byzantine Empire, the Islamic world, and later, medieval Europe. In the Islamic Golden Age, philosophers such as Al-Farabi and Avicenna studied Plato's works, integrating his ideas into their own interpretations of metaphysics and the nature of existence. These Islamic philosophers viewed Plato as a foundational thinker whose ideas could be harmonized with the principles of Islam and used to explore the nature of God and the universe. In medieval Europe, Plato's influence was felt most strongly through the works of Augustine of Hippo, one of the most important Christian theologians in history. Augustine, who had initially been influenced by the teachings of the Neoplatonists, found in Plato's philosophy a way to articulate his understanding of the relationship between the physical world and the spiritual realm. Plato's concept of the world of forms, where eternal truths existed beyond the material world, resonated deeply with Augustine's Christian beliefs. He used Platonic ideas to explain the nature of God, the soul, and the afterlife, and his writings became a cornerstone of Christian theology in the medieval period. Plato's influence on Augustine was profound, but it was not limited to theology. Throughout the Middle Ages, Plato's works were studied by scholars in universities and monasteries, where his dialogues on ethics, politics, and knowledge were seen as essential reading for anyone seeking to understand the world. His ideas were preserved and transmitted by the scholars of the time, ensuring that his legacy would endure even in an era dominated by religious thought. In the Renaissance, Plato experienced a resurgence in popularity as European scholars rediscovered the classical works of Greece and Rome. Intellectuals of the Renaissance, such as Marsilio Ficino, who translated Plato's works into Latin, embraced Platonic thought as a key to understanding not only philosophy but also art, science, and human nature. Ficino and other Renaissance thinkers believed that Plato's emphasis on beauty, harmony, and ideal forms could be applied to the creation of art and the exploration of the natural world. The Renaissance, with its focus on rebirth and the rediscovery of ancient knowledge, saw in Plato a guide to the intellectual and artistic achievements of antiquity. Plato's influence continued into the modern era, where his ideas about politics, ethics, and the nature of reality were debated and reinterpreted by some of the greatest minds of the Enlightenment. Philosophers like Immanuel Kant, René Descartes, and Baruch Spinoza grappled with Plato's theories as they developed their own ideas about reason, morality, and existence. Descartes, with his famous declaration, "I think, therefore I am," echoed Plato's belief in the power of the mind to discover truths beyond the material world. Kant, in his work on ethics and metaphysics, explored the relationship between the physical and the ideal, much like Plato had done centuries before. As the centuries unfolded, Plato's influence extended beyond the boundaries of philosophy. His ideas about education, the role of the philosopher in society, and the nature of justice found their way into the writings of political thinkers, educators, and reformers. John Locke, the English philosopher whose ideas helped shape modern democracy, was influenced by Plato's belief in the importance of education in shaping a just society. Locke's ideas on the social contract and the rights of individuals, though developed in opposition to some of Plato's more authoritarian ideas, were nonetheless shaped by the dialogues and questions Plato had raised. In the 19th century, G.W.F. Hegel and Friedrich Nietzsche both engaged deeply with Plato's ideas, though in very different ways. Hegel saw in Plato's dialectical method a precursor to his own philosophy of history, while Nietzsche critiqued Plato's emphasis on ideal forms, arguing instead for a philosophy grounded in the physical and the will to power. Yet, even in his critique, Nietzsche could not escape Plato's long shadow, as his philosophy was, in many ways, a response to the questions Plato had posed about the nature of existence and the role of the individual in the world. Today, Plato's influence can still be seen in the way we think about politics, education, and ethics. His dialogues are studied in universities around the world, and his ideas about justice and the ideal state continue to inspire debates in political theory and philosophy. Though over 2 millennia have passed since Plato walked the streets of Athens, his legacy remains as vital as ever, a testament to the enduring power of ideas to shape the course of human history. Plato's influence on later philosophers is a reflection of his timeless insights into the human condition. His ability to ask profound questions about truth, knowledge, and justice ensured that his ideas would transcend time and place, inspiring generations of thinkers to explore the mysteries of existence and the potential for a better world. As the centuries unfolded, Plato's ideas continued to weave themselves into the fabric of human thought, shaping not only philosophical discourse but also the very foundations of modern society. His works, though ancient, possess a timeless quality that has allowed them to resonate with generations of thinkers, politicians, scientists, and artists. The questions Plato raised about justice, truth, beauty, and the nature of reality are as relevant today as they were in the streets of ancient Athens. His influence stretches far beyond the boundaries of philosophy, touching upon modern governance, ethics, education, and even science. One of the most enduring aspects of Plato's legacy is his vision of a just society. Plato's exploration of justice in the Republic laid the groundwork for many of the debates we still have today about the nature of fairness, equality, and governance. His belief that a truly just society should be based on reason and wisdom rather than wealth or power has been a guiding principle for political thinkers throughout history. Plato's concept of the philosopher king, a ruler guided by wisdom rather than personal ambition, has inspired countless political theorists, from the Enlightenment philosophers to the founding fathers of modern democracies. In many ways, the modern democratic system owes a debt to Plato's exploration of governance. While Plato himself was skeptical of democracy, fearing that it could lead to the rule of the ignorant masses, his ideas about leadership, education, and justice have nonetheless influenced democratic thought. The notion that rulers should be wise, educated, and virtuous, rather than merely powerful or wealthy, is a cornerstone of many democratic systems today. Leaders are expected to have a deep understanding of the issues they face, and they are often held to a higher moral standard, an idea that can be traced back to Plato's writings. Moreover, Plato's influence can be seen in the modern concept of justice, particularly in the way we think about fairness and the rule of law. In the Republic, Plato argued that justice was not simply a matter of following laws or customs, but of creating harmony within the soul and within society. This idea has had a profound impact on legal systems around the world, where justice is often seen as a balance between individual rights and the greater good. The principle that laws should be based on reason and fairness, rather than on the whims of rulers, is deeply rooted in Platonic thought. Plato's ideas about education also continue to shape modern society. His belief that education is the key to both personal and societal transformation has become a foundational principle of modern educational systems. Today, education is seen not only as a way to acquire knowledge and skills, but also as a means of shaping character and fostering critical thinking. The Socratic method, which Plato documented in his dialogues, remains a popular teaching technique in schools and universities, encouraging students to question, debate, and think deeply about complex issues. In the realm of science, Plato's influence is perhaps less direct but no less significant. His belief in the existence of a higher, unchanging reality beyond the physical world inspired generations of scientists and mathematicians to search for universal truths. Though modern science has largely moved away from Plato's metaphysical ideas, the drive to understand the underlying principles of the universe, the quest for knowledge that goes beyond appearances, is very much in the spirit of Plato's philosophy. Albert Einstein, for instance, was deeply influenced by Platonic thought, particularly the idea that the laws of nature reflect a deeper, more profound order. Plato's impact on ethics is another area where his influence can be clearly seen. His exploration of virtue, morality, and the good life continues to inform modern ethical discussions. In the Republic, Plato argued that a just and virtuous life was one in which the soul was in harmony, with reason governing over desires and emotions. This idea has influenced countless ethical frameworks, from religious teachings to modern secular philosophy. The concept of striving for personal integrity and balance in one's life, while seeking to contribute to the greater good, is a legacy of Plato's vision of the virtuous life. Beyond philosophy, politics, and education, Plato's ideas have also found their way into the arts. His theory of forms, which posits that the material world is a reflection of a higher, more perfect reality, has inspired artists throughout the ages to seek beauty and truth in their work. During the Renaissance, artists such as Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo were deeply influenced by Plato's ideas, particularly his belief in the existence of an ideal form of beauty. This search for perfection, for a higher truth that lies beyond the physical, continues to inspire artists, musicians, and writers to this day. In literature, Plato's dialogues have been admired not only for their philosophical content but also for their literary quality. Writers and poets have long been drawn to Plato's use of narrative, character, and dialogue to explore complex ideas. His works have been a source of inspiration for countless authors, from Dante to James Joyce, who have found in Plato's writing a model for how to weave philosophical inquiry into storytelling. The blending of philosophy and literature, the idea that a story can explore deep truths about human existence, is a hallmark of Plato's influence. In the modern world, Plato's influence can even be seen in popular culture. His allegory of the cave, in which prisoners mistake shadows on a wall for reality, has become a powerful metaphor for the human condition, used in everything from films to political commentary. The idea that we are often trapped in a world of illusion, unable to see the deeper truths that lie beyond, resonates with contemporary audiences in a way that few other ancient ideas do. Films like The Matrix, for example, draw directly from Plato's allegory, exploring themes of reality, perception, and enlightenment. In political thought, Plato's exploration of the tension between individual freedom and the needs of society continues to inspire debates about the role of government and the rights of citizens. His belief that a well-ordered society requires individuals to put the common good above personal gain has been both embraced and critiqued by modern political thinkers. The balance between personal liberty and social responsibility, a central theme in modern political theory, has its roots in Plato's vision of justice. Ultimately, Plato's influence on modern thought and society is a testament to the enduring power of his ideas. Though he lived over 2,000 years ago, his questions about justice, truth, knowledge, and the good life remain as relevant today as they were in ancient Greece. His ability to ask timeless questions, to probe the depths of the human soul, and to imagine a better world has made him one of the most influential thinkers in history. Plato's legacy is not just that of a philosopher, but of a visionary, someone who dared to imagine a world governed by wisdom and justice, where individuals strove to live virtuous and meaningful lives. His ideas continue to shape our world in ways both big and small, influencing the way we think about politics, education, ethics, and even the nature of reality itself. Plato's profound exploration of ethics and moral philosophy has left a lasting impact on the way we understand virtue, justice, and the good life in the modern world. His search for universal moral truths, his insistence on the harmony of the soul, and his belief in the power of reason to guide human behavior have shaped the ethical frameworks of countless philosophers, theologians, and scholars. Though centuries have passed since Plato first walked the streets of Athens, his ideas about ethics continue to resonate, influencing not only philosophical discourse but also our daily lives and moral decisions. At the heart of Plato's ethical philosophy is his belief in the existence of absolute moral truths. For Plato, concepts like justice, virtue, and goodness were not merely human constructs, subject to change and interpretation. Rather, they were eternal truths that existed in the world of forms, beyond the physical and imperfect world we experience with our senses. This belief in objective moral values has been a cornerstone of ethical thought ever since, providing the foundation for many moral theories that seek to understand the nature of right and wrong. Plato's conception of the just life was deeply tied to his vision of the soul. In his view, the soul was composed of three parts: reason, spirit, and desire. A just and virtuous person, Plato argued, was someone whose soul was in harmony with reason governing over spirit and desire. This balance, he believed, was essential for living a good life, a life in which one's actions were guided by wisdom and virtue rather than by base desires or emotions. This idea of inner harmony has been influential in shaping modern conceptions of morality, where the notion of self-control and the alignment of one's actions with rational principles remain central to ethical discussions. Plato's view of ethics was not confined to the individual, however. He believed that just as the individual soul could achieve harmony, so too could society. In the Republic, he described a vision of a perfectly just society, where each individual played their part in creating balance and order. The philosopher kings ruled with wisdom, the guardians protected with courage, and the producers provided for the material needs of the state. For Plato, justice was about creating harmony, both within the individual and within society as a whole. This idea of justice as balance and harmony has had a profound influence on modern ethical thought. In contemporary discussions of ethics, there is often a focus on the need to balance individual rights and freedoms with the common good, a concept that can be traced back to Plato's vision of justice. The idea that a just society is one where each person plays their part in maintaining order and fairness is still a guiding principle in political theory and ethics today. Plato's influence is also felt in the realm of virtue ethics, a branch of moral philosophy that emphasizes the development of good character traits, or virtues, as the key to living a moral life. Plato's emphasis on the cultivation of virtues like wisdom, courage, and temperance has inspired generations of philosophers, from Aristotle to modern virtue ethicists, who argue that moral behavior arises not from following rigid rules or laws, but from developing virtuous habits and dispositions. In the modern world, thinkers such as Alastair MacIntyre and Philippa Foot have built upon Plato's ideas, arguing that the development of moral character is central to ethical life. These philosophers, like Plato before them, believe that ethical behavior cannot simply be reduced to a set of rules or duties. Rather, it is about becoming a person who consistently acts with wisdom, courage, and justice. In this way, Plato's legacy in virtue ethics remains strong, as his vision of the ethical life continues to inspire those who seek to understand how we can live good, meaningful lives. Another key area of modern ethical thought influenced by Plato is the idea of moral realism. Plato's belief that there are objective truths about what is good, just, and virtuous has been a cornerstone for many moral realists, who argue that moral truths exist independently of human beliefs or opinions. This stands in contrast to moral relativism, which suggests that moral truths are subjective and can vary from culture to culture or person to person. Plato's insistence on the existence of universal moral truths has provided a powerful argument for those who defend the idea that some actions are inherently right or wrong, regardless of cultural or individual perspectives. In the realm of political ethics, Plato's ideas have also left a deep imprint. His belief that leaders should be guided by wisdom and virtue rather than personal ambition or power is a principle that has shaped the development of moral leadership. The concept of the philosopher king, who rules with justice and reason, has inspired political thinkers throughout history to argue that leaders must be held to a higher moral standard. This idea is particularly relevant in discussions about the role of ethics in governance, where there is an ongoing debate about the responsibilities of leaders to act with integrity and wisdom, prioritizing the common good over personal gain. One of the most famous modern applications of Plato's ideas about ethics and leadership can be seen in the philosophy of John Rawls, one of the most influential political philosophers of the 20th century. In his work A Theory of Justice, Rawls proposed a vision of a just society that echoes many of Plato's ideas. Rawls' veil of ignorance, a thought experiment in which individuals make decisions about justice without knowing their place in society, is deeply influenced by Plato's belief in the impartiality of justice. Like Plato, Rawls argued that a just society must be based on fairness and equality, with leaders who are guided by reason and a commitment to the common good. Plato's profound exploration of ethics and moral philosophy has left a lasting impact on the way we understand virtue, justice, and the good life in the modern world. His search for universal moral truths, his insistence on the harmony of the soul, and his belief in the power of reason to guide human behavior have shaped the ethical frameworks of countless philosophers, theologians, and scholars. Though centuries have passed since Plato first walked the streets of Athens, his ideas about ethics continue to resonate, influencing not only philosophical discourse but also our daily lives and moral decisions. At the heart of Plato's ethical philosophy is his belief in the existence of absolute moral truths. For Plato, concepts like justice, virtue, and goodness were not merely human constructs, subject to change and interpretation. Rather, they were eternal truths that existed in the world of forms, beyond the physical and imperfect world we experience with our senses. This belief in objective moral values has been a cornerstone of ethical thought ever since, providing the foundation for many moral theories that seek to understand the nature of right and wrong. Plato's conception of the just life was deeply tied to his vision of the soul. In his view, the soul was composed of three parts: reason, spirit, and desire. A just and virtuous person, Plato argued, was someone whose soul was in harmony, with reason governing over spirit and desire. This balance, he believed, was essential for living a good life, a life in which one's actions were guided by wisdom and virtue rather than by base desires or emotions. This idea of inner harmony has been influential in shaping modern conceptions of morality, where the notion of self-control and the alignment of one's actions with rational principles remain central to ethical discussions. Plato's view of ethics was not confined to the individual, however. He believed that just as the individual soul could achieve harmony, so too could society. In the Republic, he described a vision of a perfectly just society where each individual played their part in creating balance and order. The philosopher kings ruled with wisdom, the guardians protected with courage, and the producers provided for the material needs of the state. For Plato, justice was about creating harmony, both within the individual and within society as a whole. This idea of justice as balance and harmony has had a profound influence on modern ethical thought. In contemporary discussions of ethics, there is often a focus on the need to balance individual rights and freedoms with the common good, a concept that can be traced back to Plato's vision of justice. The idea that a just society is one where each person plays their part in maintaining order and fairness is still a guiding principle in political theory and ethics today. Plato's influence is also felt in the realm of virtue ethics, a branch of moral philosophy that emphasizes the development of good character traits or virtues as the key to living a moral life. Plato's emphasis on the cultivation of virtues like wisdom, courage, and temperance has inspired generations of philosophers, from Aristotle to modern virtue ethicists, who argue that moral behavior arises not from following rigid rules or laws, but from developing virtuous habits and dispositions. In the modern world, thinkers such as Alasdair MacIntyre and Philippa Foot have built upon Plato's ideas, arguing that the development of moral character is central to ethical life. These philosophers, like Plato before them, believe that ethical behavior cannot simply be reduced to a set of rules or duties. Rather, it is about becoming a person who consistently acts with wisdom, courage, and justice. In this way, Plato's legacy in virtue ethics remains strong, as his vision of the ethical life continues to inspire those who seek to understand how we can live good, meaningful lives. Another key area of modern ethical thought influenced by Plato is the idea of moral realism. Plato's belief that there are objective truths about what is good, just, and virtuous has been a cornerstone for many moral realists, who argue that moral truths exist independently of human beliefs or opinions. This stands in contrast to moral relativism, which suggests that moral truths are subjective and can vary from culture to culture or person to person. Plato's insistence on the existence of universal moral truths has provided a powerful argument for those who defend the idea that some actions are inherently right or wrong, regardless of cultural or individual perspectives. In the realm of political ethics, Plato's ideas have also left a deep imprint. His belief that leaders should be guided by wisdom and virtue rather than personal ambition or power is a principle that has shaped the development of moral leadership. The concept of the philosopher king, who rules with justice and reason, has inspired political thinkers throughout history to argue that leaders must be held to a higher moral standard. This idea is particularly relevant in discussions about the role of ethics in governance, where there is an ongoing debate about the responsibilities of leaders to act with integrity and wisdom, prioritizing the common good over personal gain. One of the most famous modern applications of Plato's ideas about ethics and leadership can be seen in the philosophy of John Rawls, one of the most influential political philosophers of the 20th century. In his work A Theory of Justice, Rawls proposed a vision of a just society that echoes many of Plato's ideas. Rawls' Veil of Ignorance, a thought experiment in which individuals make decisions about justice without knowing their place in society, is deeply influenced by Plato's belief in the impartiality of justice. Like Plato, Rawls argued that a just society must be based on fairness and equality, with leaders who are guided by reason and a commitment to the common good. In addition to his influence on political ethics, Plato's ideas have also had a lasting impact on religious ethics. His exploration of the relationship between the material world and the higher, more perfect realm of the forms has deeply influenced Christian thought, particularly through the writings of St. Augustine. Augustine, who was profoundly shaped by Plato's ideas, integrated Platonic philosophy into Christian theology, arguing that the pursuit of virtue and the alignment of the soul with God's will were essential to the moral life. This Platonic vision of moral perfection and the struggle to achieve inner harmony became central to Christian ethics and continues to shape religious discussions about virtue and sin. Plato's legacy in modern ethics is, in many ways, a reflection of his larger philosophical vision, a vision in which reason, virtue, and the pursuit of truth are the keys to living a good life. His belief that ethics is not simply about following rules, but about cultivating a just soul and a just society, continues to inspire those who seek to understand how we can live in harmony with ourselves and with others. In the modern world, where ethical dilemmas are often complex and multifaceted, Plato's ideas provide a framework for thinking about moral questions in a deep and meaningful way. Whether in the context of personal virtue, political leadership, or the pursuit of justice, Plato's exploration of ethics remains as relevant today as it was in ancient Athens. His influence endures, reminding us that the search for wisdom and the quest for a just life are timeless pursuits, ones that continue to shape the way we think about right and wrong, good and evil, and the nature of the human soul. While Plato is often remembered for his philosophical explorations of metaphysics, ethics, and politics, his impact on the development of science and logic has been equally profound. Though Plato himself was not a scientist in the modern sense, his ideas about knowledge, the nature of reality, and the importance of reason laid the groundwork for the scientific inquiry that would come to define much of Western thought. From the early advancements in mathematics and astronomy to the birth of modern scientific methods, Plato's influence can be traced through the evolution of science and logic. Plato's emphasis on reason and the pursuit of truth formed the intellectual bedrock for the development of logic, mathematics, and scientific thought. Central to Plato's philosophy was the idea that the material world, the world of appearances, was not the ultimate reality. Instead, true knowledge could only be attained by grasping the eternal and unchanging forms, the perfect, abstract realities that existed beyond the physical world. This distinction between the material and the ideal encouraged future thinkers to seek out the underlying principles and truths of the universe rather than accepting the world as it appeared on the surface. In his dialogue Timaeus, Plato explored the nature of the cosmos, offering a vision of the universe that was both ordered and governed by reason. While much of Timaeus can be seen as speculative rather than scientific, it reflected Plato's belief that the cosmos operated according to logical principles that could be understood through reason and inquiry. This idea that the universe is ordered, rational, and intelligible became a cornerstone of scientific thought. Plato's vision of a mathematically structured universe, where the heavens followed perfect, unchanging laws, influenced generations of astronomers and mathematicians. One of the most direct influences Plato had on science was through his student, Eudoxus of Cnidus, who studied at the academy and went on to become one of the leading astronomers of the ancient world. Eudoxus developed a model of the heavens that sought to explain the motions of the planets using a system of concentric spheres, a model that would later be refined by Claudius Ptolemy and become central to ancient and medieval astronomy. Though this geocentric model would eventually be replaced by the heliocentric theory of Copernicus, the pursuit of mathematical harmony in the cosmos, which Eudoxus inherited from Plato, remained a guiding principle in the study of the stars. Plato's emphasis on mathematics as the key to understanding the universe was also influential in the development of geometry. Plato famously inscribed the words, "Let no one ignorant of geometry enter" at the entrance to the academy, signaling his belief that mathematics was the foundation of all knowledge. This emphasis on geometry, and his insistence that mathematical forms represented eternal truths, had a profound impact on mathematicians like Euclid, whose work in geometry became the standard for centuries to come. Euclid's Elements, one of the most important mathematical works in history, was deeply influenced by Platonic thought. Euclid's systematic approach to geometry, where he began with a set of axioms and built up a logical system of theorems, mirrored Plato's belief that knowledge could be derived from first principles through the use of reason. Euclid's work became the basis for the study of geometry in both the ancient and modern worlds, and his influence can be seen in everything from architecture to the development of modern physics. Plato's ideas also played a crucial role in the development of logic, particularly through the work of Aristotle, his most famous student. While Aristotle would go on to develop his own system of logic, known as syllogistic logic, Plato's emphasis on dialectic reasoning, the process of dialogue and debate to arrive at truth, was a precursor to formal logical systems. The method of asking probing questions, engaging in argument, and testing ideas through reasoned discourse, which Plato practiced in his dialogues, laid the groundwork for the development of logical thought. Aristotle's system of formal logic, which categorized arguments into valid and invalid forms, built upon the intellectual foundation that Plato had established. This system of logic would dominate Western thought for centuries, influencing everything from philosophical argumentation to scientific reasoning. It wasn't until the 19th and 20th centuries, with the development of symbolic logic by philosophers like Gottlob Frege and Bertrand Russell, that a more advanced system of logic would emerge, but even then, the roots of modern logic can be traced back to the dialogues of Plato and the systematic approach of Aristotle. In the realm of natural science, Plato's influence is perhaps most evident in his emphasis on the importance of inquiry and questioning. Plato's insistence that knowledge must be pursued through rigorous thought, and that the search for truth was an ongoing process, deeply influenced the scientific method. Though Plato himself did not advocate for empirical experimentation in the way modern science does, his belief in the power of reason and deduction laid the intellectual foundation for later scientific advancements. During the scientific revolution of the 16th and 17th centuries, Plato's ideas about mathematics and the nature of reality found new expression in the work of figures like Galileo Galilei, Johannes Kepler, and Isaac Newton. These thinkers, influenced by the Platonic idea that the universe was governed by mathematical laws, sought to uncover the hidden principles that explain the motions of the planets, the behavior of light, and the forces of nature. Kepler, in particular, was deeply influenced by Platonic thought, and he often spoke of the mathematical beauty and harmony of the universe in terms that echoed Plato's own writings. Newton's groundbreaking work in mathematics and physics, particularly his discovery of the laws of motion and universal gravitation, was similarly shaped by the Platonic belief that the universe could be understood through reason and mathematical principles. Newton, like many of his contemporaries, believed that the universe was created with a rational order, and his work was driven by the search for the underlying laws that govern the physical world. In this sense, Newton's work can be seen as a continuation of the Platonic project, the quest to understand the eternal truths that lie behind the ever-changing material world. In the modern era, the influence of Plato can still be felt in fields as diverse as theoretical physics, cosmology, and mathematics. Albert Einstein, whose theories of relativity revolutionized our understanding of space and time, was deeply influenced by Platonic thought. Einstein's belief in the existence of an underlying order to the universe and his conviction that the laws of nature reflected a deeper reality echoed Plato's belief in the realm of forms. Even as modern science moves beyond some of Plato's metaphysical assumptions, the quest for ultimate truths, the search for beauty and harmony in the laws of nature, remains a testament to Plato's lasting influence. In many ways, Plato's influence on science and logic is a reflection of his larger philosophical vision, a vision that sought to understand not just the material world, but the eternal principles that governed it. His belief in the power of reason to uncover the mysteries of the universe, his emphasis on mathematical harmony, and his commitment to rigorous inquiry continue to inspire scientists, mathematicians, and philosophers to this day. As we continue to explore the mysteries of the cosmos, develop new technologies, and push the boundaries of human knowledge, Plato's legacy remains alive. His insistence that there are deeper truths to be discovered, truths that lie beyond the surface of appearances, continues to guide and inspire the search for knowledge in the modern world. While Plato is often remembered for his contributions to philosophy, ethics, and science, his influence on the world of art and aesthetics is equally profound. Plato's exploration of beauty, art, and the role of the artist in society laid the foundation for centuries of debate about the nature of artistic creation and the meaning of beauty. His ideas, both celebrated and contested, continue to shape the way we think about art, creativity, and the pursuit of aesthetic ideals. At the heart of Plato's philosophy of art is his theory of forms, which posits that the material world is a mere shadow of a higher, more perfect reality. For Plato, true beauty did not reside in the physical objects of the world, but in the ideal forms, the perfect, unchanging concepts that exist beyond the realm of human perception. This belief had a profound impact on the way artists and thinkers approached the idea of beauty for centuries to come. Plato's view suggested that art, rather than simply imitating the physical world, should strive to capture the eternal beauty of the forms, leading artists to seek deeper meaning beyond mere appearances. Yet, Plato's relationship with art was complex. In his famous work, The Republic, Plato expressed deep skepticism about the value of art and poetry. He argued that artists, by creating representations of the physical world, were producing mere imitations of imitations. For Plato, the physical world was already an imperfect reflection of the realm of forms, and art, by imitating this imperfect world, was twice removed from the truth. He feared that art, particularly poetry and drama, could deceive people by appealing to their emotions rather than their reason, leading them further away from the pursuit of true knowledge. In fact, Plato went so far as to suggest that certain types of art should be banned from his ideal society. In The Republic, he famously argued that poets, with their ability to stir the passions, had no place in the city of philosopher kings, where reason and wisdom were paramount. Plato believed that the emotions aroused by art, whether in the form of tragic drama or epic poetry, could lead people to make irrational decisions, clouding their judgment and leading them away from virtue. Despite his critique of art, however, Plato's ideas about beauty and aesthetics would go on to inspire generations of artists and thinkers. His belief that beauty was an ideal that existed beyond the material world encouraged artists to pursue a higher vision of their craft, one that sought to reflect the eternal truths of the universe. This Platonic ideal of beauty as something transcendent and perfect would resonate throughout the centuries, influencing artistic movements and philosophical discussions about art. One of the most significant periods in which Plato's ideas about art and beauty were revived was during the Renaissance. Renaissance artists and thinkers, who were deeply influenced by the rediscovery of classical Greek philosophy, embraced Plato's concept of ideal beauty and sought to incorporate it into their works. Artists such as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael believed that their creations could reflect not only the physical beauty of the human form but also the higher, divine beauty that Plato had described in his philosophy. For Renaissance artists, the human body itself became a symbol of Platonic ideals. Michelangelo's sculptures, such as David and the figures on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, sought to capture the perfect proportions and harmony of the human form, embodying the Platonic idea of the ideal man. These artists believed that through their art, they could offer a glimpse of the divine order that governed the universe, reflecting the eternal truths that lay behind the imperfections of the material world. Plato's influence on art also extended into the realm of architecture. His belief in the importance of harmony, proportion, and mathematical precision in beauty inspired architects to create structures that reflected these ideals. The Florentine architect Brunelleschi, for example, applied Platonic principles of proportion and geometry in his designs, believing that architecture should reflect the harmonious order of the cosmos. This Platonic emphasis on order and symmetry can be seen in the carefully proportioned buildings of the Renaissance, where beauty was seen as a reflection of the deeper truths of the universe. Plato's ideas about art and beauty continued to evolve over the centuries, influencing not only the classical and Renaissance traditions but also later artistic movements. In the Romantic period, artists and poets sought to reconcile Plato's ideas about beauty and emotion, seeing in art a way to transcend the limitations of the physical world and connect with something deeper and more profound. William Wordsworth, for example, saw poetry as a means of capturing the beauty and truth of the natural world, a reflection of the eternal forms that Plato had described. In the modern era, Plato's influence can be seen in movements such as abstract art, where artists sought to move beyond the representation of the physical world and explore the deeper, more universal truths that lay beneath the surface. Artists like Piet Mondrian and Vasily Kandinsky believed that art could capture the essence of the forms through the use of color, shape, and geometry. Their work, which moved away from the literal depiction of objects and embraced abstraction, was deeply influenced by the Platonic idea that true beauty and truth existed beyond the material world. Plato's influence on art also extended into the realm of architecture. His belief in the importance of harmony, proportion, and mathematical precision in beauty inspired architects to create structures that reflected these ideals. The Florentine architect Brunelleschi, for example, applied Platonic principles of proportion and geometry in his designs, believing that architecture should reflect the harmonious order of the cosmos. This Platonic emphasis on order and symmetry can be seen in the carefully proportioned buildings of the Renaissance, where beauty was seen as a reflection of the deeper truths of the universe. Plato's ideas about art and beauty continued to evolve over the centuries, influencing not only the classical and Renaissance traditions but also later artistic movements. In the Romantic period, artists and poets sought to reconcile Plato's ideas about beauty and emotion, seeing in art a way to transcend the limitations of the physical world and connect with something deeper and more profound. William Wordsworth, for example, saw poetry as a means of capturing the beauty and truth of the natural world, a reflection of the eternal forms that Plato had described. In the modern era, Plato's influence can be seen in movements such as abstract art, where artists sought to move beyond the representation of the physical world and explore the deeper, more universal truths that lay beneath the surface. Artists like Piet Mondrian and Vasily Kandinsky believed that art could capture the essence of the forms through the use of color, shape, and geometry. Their work, which moved away from the literal depiction of objects and embraced abstraction, was deeply influenced by the Platonic idea that true beauty and truth existed beyond the material world. Plato's impact on aesthetics also extended into the realm of philosophy, where thinkers have long grappled with his ideas about the nature of beauty and the role of art in society. In the 18th century, philosophers like Immanuel Kant and Friedrich Schiller engaged with Plato's ideas, exploring the relationship between beauty, morality, and reason. Kant, in particular, was influenced by Plato's belief in the universality of beauty, arguing that aesthetic judgments were not merely subjective but reflected a deeper, shared human experience. In the 20th century, philosophers of art, such as Clive Bell and Arthur Danto, continued to explore Platonic themes in their discussions of beauty and artistic representation. Bell's theory of significant form, which argued that the essence of art lay in the formal qualities of line, shape, and color, echoed Plato's belief in the importance of underlying forms. Similarly, Danto's exploration of the boundaries of art and its ability to convey meaning drew on Platonic ideas about the role of the artist in revealing deeper truths. In popular culture, Plato's ideas about art and beauty continue to resonate. His allegory of the cave, where individuals mistake shadows on the wall for reality, has become a powerful metaphor for the way art and media shape our perception of the world. This allegory has been referenced in countless works of literature, film, and visual art, from George Orwell's 1984 to modern films like The Truman Show and Inception, where characters grapple with the distinction between illusion and reality. Plato's influence on art and aesthetics ultimately reflects his larger philosophical vision, a vision in which beauty, like truth, is not merely a reflection of the physical world but a glimpse into the eternal and unchanging reality that lies beyond. His belief that art could both reveal and obscure truth has shaped the way we think about creativity, expression, and the role of the artist in society. Even today, as artists continue to explore new forms and mediums, Plato's ideas remain a guiding force, reminding us that beauty and truth are inextricably linked in the search for deeper meaning. Plato's ideas about politics and governance, developed more than 2,000 years ago, continue to resonate in the modern world. His philosophical explorations of justice, power, and leadership, particularly in the Republic, have shaped the way we think about governance, law, and the role of leaders in society. Plato's belief that the best rulers were not the wealthiest or the most powerful, but the wisest and most virtuous, has left a lasting imprint on political theory, inspiring debates about what constitutes a just society and who is best suited to lead. At the core of Plato's political philosophy is his concept of justice. In the Republic, Plato explores what it means to create a just society, one in which every individual plays a role in maintaining harmony and order. For Plato, justice was not simply a matter of following laws or ensuring equality. It was about creating a system in which each individual fulfilled their natural role, contributing to the common good. This vision of justice, where the needs of society are balanced with the rights and duties of individuals, has influenced political thinkers for centuries and continues to shape modern debates about fairness, equality, and the structure of government. One of Plato's most enduring contributions to political thought is his concept of the philosopher king. In the Republic, Plato famously argues that the best rulers are not those who seek power for its own sake, but those who possess wisdom and knowledge. These philosopher kings, Plato believed, would be uniquely qualified to govern because they were not motivated by personal gain or ambition, but by a deep understanding of what was best for the community as a whole. For Plato, the philosopher king was the ideal ruler, one who had ascended beyond the distractions of the material world to grasp the eternal truths of justice, goodness, and virtue. Though Plato's idea of a philosopher king may seem idealistic, it has had a profound influence on political theory, particularly in discussions about the nature of leadership and the qualifications of rulers. The notion that leaders should be wise, educated, and guided by a sense of moral responsibility has been echoed throughout history, from the Enlightenment philosophers who advocated for reason and wisdom in governance to modern leaders who are held to a high standard of moral integrity. Even in democratic societies, where leaders are elected by the people, there remains an expectation that those in power should possess wisdom and virtue, much like Plato's philosopher kings. Plato's skepticism of democracy also left a significant mark on political thought. Having witnessed the instability of Athens' democratic government and the tragic execution of his teacher Socrates by a democratic vote, Plato became deeply critical of the idea that ordinary citizens could be trusted to make wise decisions about governance. In the Republic, he argues that democracy, by giving power to the masses, often leads to chaos, as people are easily swayed by emotion and self-interest rather than reason and wisdom. Plato feared that democracy could lead to demagoguery, where charismatic leaders would manipulate the masses for their own gain rather than governing with justice and reason. This critique of democracy has been a subject of intense debate throughout history. While modern democratic systems are built on the belief in the wisdom of the people, Plato's warnings about the dangers of mob rule and the potential for demagogues to exploit popular sentiment have proven to be remarkably prescient. His ideas continue to be discussed in political theory, particularly in times of political unrest or when the rise of populist leaders calls into question the balance between democracy and responsible governance. Plato's influence on political thought extends beyond leadership and governance to include his ideas about education and the role of the state. In the Republic, Plato envisioned a society where education was central to the development of both individuals and the state. He believed that education was the key to creating virtuous citizens who could contribute to the harmony of society. This belief in the power of education to shape both individuals and society has influenced political systems around the world, where public education is seen as a crucial component of a just and functioning society. Plato's vision of a meritocratic society, where individuals are assigned roles based on their abilities and virtues rather than their birth or wealth, has also had a lasting impact on political thought. In the Republic, he describes a society divided into three classes: the rulers, philosopher kings, the guardians, warriors who protect the state, and the producers, farmers, artisans, and merchants. Each class plays a vital role in maintaining the balance of the state, and individuals are placed in these roles based on their natural talents and abilities. This idea of meritocracy, where individuals rise to positions of power and responsibility based on their skills and virtues, has influenced modern political systems where there is a strong belief in the value of merit over privilege. In addition to his influence on Western political thought, Plato's ideas have also been studied and adopted in other parts of the world. In the Islamic Golden Age, scholars such as Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina, Avicenna, engaged deeply with Plato's political philosophy, integrating his ideas into their own discussions of governance and the role of rulers. Al-Farabi, in particular, was known for his writings on the virtuous city, where he echoed many of Plato's ideas about the importance of wise and virtuous leadership in creating a just and harmonious society. This blending of Platonic philosophy with Islamic thought helped to shape political discourse in the medieval Islamic world, where rulers were often expected to embody both wisdom and justice. Plato's influence on politics and governance can also be seen in the Renaissance, when political thinkers such as Niccolò Machiavelli and Thomas More engaged with Platonic ideas in their own writings. While Machiavelli is often seen as a more cynical thinker, focused on the practical realities of power, his discussions of virtue, a form of political wisdom, were influenced by Plato's ideas about leadership and the role of reason in governance. Thomas More's Utopia, on the other hand, reflects many of Plato's ideas from the Republic, particularly the vision of a society where justice and harmony are achieved through wise and virtuous leadership. In the modern era, Plato's ideas about governance have continued to influence political theory, particularly in discussions about the role of reason, morality, and education in leadership. Political philosophers such as John Rawls, whose work A Theory of Justice is one of the most influential political treatises of the 20th century, were deeply influenced by Platonic ideas. Rawls' concept of justice as fairness, where social and economic inequalities are only justified if they benefit the least advantaged members of society, echoes Plato's belief that justice is about creating balance and harmony in society. Plato's influence can also be seen in the development of constitutional law and the separation of powers in modern democracies. His belief that a well-ordered society required a balance between different classes and roles, each contributing to the common good, laid the groundwork for later ideas about checks and balances in governance. The idea that power should be distributed among different branches of government, each with its own responsibilities and limitations, reflects Plato's vision of a balanced society where no one group or individual holds too much power. Ultimately, Plato's influence on politics and governance is a testament to the enduring power of his ideas. His vision of justice, leadership, and the role of reason in governance continues to inspire political thought today, shaping the way we think about the responsibilities of leaders, the structure of government, and the pursuit of a just society. Though his ideal of the philosopher king may seem distant, his belief in the importance of wisdom, virtue, and education in leadership remains as relevant now as it was in ancient Greece. Plato's philosophy not only shaped the worlds of politics, ethics, and art, but also left a profound and lasting impact on religion and theology. His exploration of metaphysics, the nature of the soul, and the existence of a higher reality influenced the development of religious thought in both the Western and Eastern traditions. From early Christian theologians to Islamic scholars and beyond, Plato's ideas have been woven into the fabric of religious philosophy, helping to shape how people understand the divine, the afterlife, and the relationship between humanity and the cosmos. One of the most significant ways Plato influenced religious thought is through his concept of the world of forms, particularly the idea that there exists a higher, perfect reality beyond the material world. In Plato's philosophy, the physical world we experience with our senses is a mere shadow of this higher realm, where eternal truths such as beauty, justice, and goodness exist in their purest forms. This dualistic view of reality, where the material world is seen as transient and imperfect, and the spiritual or ideal realm as eternal and unchanging, deeply influenced early Christian thought, particularly through the works of St. Augustine. Augustine, one of the most important theologians in the history of Christianity, was profoundly shaped by Platonic ideas. Before his conversion to Christianity, Augustine was a follower of Neoplatonism, a philosophical system that built on Plato's ideas and emphasized the existence of a single, divine source of all reality. After his conversion, Augustine used Platonic concepts to explain key Christian doctrines such as the nature of God, the immortality of the soul, and the existence of heaven and hell. Plato's distinction between the imperfect material world and the perfect, transcendent realm of forms provided Augustine with a framework for understanding the Christian belief in an eternal, unchanging God who existed beyond the physical world. Plato's influence on Christian theology is particularly evident in Augustine's writings about the soul. In the Republic, Plato had described the soul as being divided into three parts: reason, spirit, and desire. He believed that the soul was immortal and that it existed before the body, only to be trapped in the material world through the process of birth. This idea of the soul's pre-existence and its eventual return to the realm of the divine resonated deeply with early Christian thinkers who saw parallels between Plato's description of the soul's journey and Christian teachings about the soul's ascent to heaven after death. Augustine adopted Plato's belief in the immortality of the soul and used it to articulate the Christian doctrine of eternal life. He argued that the soul, being created by God, was immortal and destined for either eternal salvation or damnation, depending on how one lived their life on earth. Plato's influence can also be seen in Augustine's concept of the city of God, a perfect, divine realm that exists beyond the earthly, imperfect world, a reflection of Plato's vision of the world of forms. Plato's impact on religious thought extended beyond Christianity. In the Islamic Golden Age, Muslim philosophers and theologians engaged deeply with Greek philosophy, particularly the works of Plato and Aristotle. One of the most influential of these thinkers was Al-Farabi, who sought to reconcile Platonic philosophy with Islamic teachings. Al-Farabi believed that the ideal ruler, much like Plato's philosopher king, should possess both wisdom and virtue, guiding the state in accordance with divine principles. He also argued that the pursuit of knowledge was a form of worship, as it allowed individuals to come closer to understanding the nature of God and the universe. Another significant figure in Islamic thought who was influenced by Plato was Avicenna ibn Sina, one of the greatest philosophers and scientists of the medieval Islamic world. Avicenna's metaphysical writings were deeply rooted in Neoplatonism, and he used Platonic ideas to explore the nature of God, the soul, and the afterlife. He believed that the soul was a distinct, immaterial entity that existed independently of the body, and that it would return to the divine after death. Avicenna's integration of Platonic thought into Islamic philosophy helped to shape the intellectual and theological landscape of the medieval Islamic world, where Plato's ideas continued to influence discussions about the nature of the divine. In Judaism, Platonic thought also found its way into religious philosophy, particularly through the works of the Jewish philosopher Philo of Alexandria. Philo, who lived in the 1st century CE, was a Hellenistic Jewish thinker who sought to harmonize Greek philosophy with Jewish scripture. He was deeply influenced by Plato's ideas, particularly the distinction between the material and spiritual realms, and he used Platonic concepts to interpret the Hebrew Bible. Philo argued that the material world was created by God as a reflection of the divine forms, and that human beings, made in the image of God, had the capacity to ascend to a higher, more spiritual existence through reason and contemplation. Philo's synthesis of Platonic and Jewish thought had a profound impact on later Jewish philosophers, including Maimonides, who integrated Greek philosophy into his own writings on Jewish law and theology. Maimonides, like Philo, saw the pursuit of knowledge as a means of understanding God's will and achieving spiritual perfection. Plato's influence on Jewish thought, though sometimes subtle, helped to shape the intellectual and theological traditions of Judaism, particularly in discussions about the nature of the soul, the afterlife, and the relationship between God and creation. In addition to his influence on religious metaphysics, Plato's ideas about morality and virtue also left a deep imprint on religious ethics. His belief that the soul must be in harmony with reason governing over desire and emotion resonated with religious teachings about the importance of self-discipline and moral integrity. In both Christian and Islamic thought, Plato's concept of the virtuous soul, one that seeks to align itself with higher truths and resist the temptations of the material world, became a central theme in discussions about piety and righteousness. For example, in Christianity, the idea of the ascetic life, where individuals renounce worldly pleasures in pursuit of spiritual purity, reflects Platonic ideas about the need to transcend the physical world in order to reach a higher state of being. Many Christian monastic traditions, where monks and nuns devote themselves to a life of contemplation, prayer, and self-denial, can trace their philosophical roots to Plato's teachings about the soul and its journey toward the divine. In Islamic mysticism, or Sufism, similar Platonic themes can be found. Sufis emphasize the importance of inner purity and the cultivation of a deep, personal connection with God. The Sufi path is often described as a journey of the soul, where individuals strive to overcome their lower desires and reach a state of union with the divine. This journey mirrors Plato's belief in the ascent of the soul from the material world to the realm of eternal truths, where the individual comes to know the true nature of reality and the divine. In the modern world, Plato's influence on religion and theology continues to be felt. His ideas about the nature of God, the soul, and the afterlife are still discussed by theologians and philosophers, and his belief in the existence of a higher, transcendent reality continues to inspire religious thought. Whether in discussions about the immortality of the soul, the pursuit of moral virtue, or the nature of divine truth, Plato's ideas remain a vital part of religious philosophy, shaping how people of faith understand their place in the cosmos and their relationship with the divine. Plato's influence on religion is ultimately a reflection of his larger philosophical vision, a vision in which the material world is but a shadow of a higher, more perfect reality, and where the soul's journey is one of seeking truth, wisdom, and union with the divine. His ideas about the nature of existence, the immortality of the soul, and the pursuit of moral and spiritual perfection have left an indelible mark on religious thought, reminding us that the search for meaning in the divine is a timeless quest, one that transcends cultures, religions, and epochs. Of all Plato's contributions to human thought and culture, perhaps none has been more enduring than his vision of education. For Plato, education was not merely about the transmission of knowledge or the teaching of practical skills. It was a deeply transformative process aimed at guiding the soul toward truth and wisdom. His belief that education was the key to both personal enlightenment and societal harmony continues to resonate today, shaping the way we think about learning, teaching, and the development of the human mind. Plato's philosophy of education was rooted in his broader metaphysical beliefs, particularly his theory of forms. He argued that the material world we experience with our senses was only a shadow of a higher, more perfect reality, where the eternal forms of truth, beauty, and justice resided. In this framework, education was the means by which individuals could come to understand these higher truths, moving beyond the illusions of the physical world to grasp the eternal realities that lay beyond. Plato believed that the role of the teacher was not to fill the student's mind with facts, but to help guide them toward an understanding of these deeper, more profound truths. This idea was central to the establishment of Plato's Academy, one of the earliest institutions of higher learning in the Western world. Founded around 387 BCE, the Academy was not a school in the modern sense, but a community of scholars dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge and wisdom. Here, students engaged in rigorous dialogue and debate, questioning assumptions, testing ideas, and seeking to uncover the eternal truths that govern both the cosmos and human existence. The Academy became a model for future institutions of learning, where the focus was not just on practical knowledge but on the cultivation of wisdom and virtue. One of Plato's most influential contributions to educational philosophy is the belief that education is a lifelong journey. In the Republic, Plato famously describes the allegory of the cave, in which prisoners are chained in a dark cave, only able to see the shadows of objects cast on the wall in front of them. The philosopher, according to Plato, is like a prisoner who has been free from the cave and, for the first time, sees the true world outside. Education, for Plato, is the process of turning the soul away from the shadows and toward the light, a journey that requires constant questioning, reflection, and intellectual growth. For Plato, learning was never a finite process, it was a continuous path toward greater understanding. Plato also placed a strong emphasis on the moral dimension of education. In his view, the goal of education was not simply to produce knowledgeable individuals, but virtuous ones. He believed that true knowledge was inseparable from goodness, and that the pursuit of wisdom was also a pursuit of moral excellence. In the Republic, Plato outlines a vision of a society governed by philosopher kings, rulers who had been educated to not only understand the deeper truths of the universe, but also to live in accordance with those truths. For Plato, education was not just about developing the intellect, it was about shaping the character and soul of the individual, guiding them toward a life of virtue, justice, and wisdom. This idea of education as a moral and intellectual journey has had a profound influence on educational systems throughout history. In the Middle Ages, scholars in medieval universities were deeply influenced by Plato's vision of education, particularly his belief that knowledge and virtue were intertwined. The scholastic tradition, which dominated medieval education, sought to reconcile faith and reason, drawing heavily on Platonic ideas about the nature of truth and the importance of intellectual inquiry. The idea that education was a means of cultivating both the mind and the soul became central to the development of Western education, particularly in the context of religious and moral instruction. Plato's influence on education was further revived during the Renaissance, a period in which classical ideas were rediscovered and reinterpreted by European scholars and intellectuals. Renaissance thinkers, such as Erasmus and Pico della Mirandola, embraced Plato's vision of education as a transformative process aimed at the development of the whole person, intellectually, morally, and spiritually. They believed that education could lead to the perfecting of human nature, and that through the study of philosophy, art, and science, individuals could achieve a higher understanding of both themselves and the world around them. This Platonic ideal of education as a path to personal and societal improvement would go on to shape the humanist traditions of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. In the modern era, Plato's ideas about education continue to influence how we think about teaching and learning. His belief that education should cultivate both the intellect and the character of the individual remains central to modern educational philosophy. In contemporary schools and universities, there is often a focus not just on imparting knowledge, but on developing critical thinking skills, ethical reasoning, and the ability to engage with complex moral and social issues, an approach that owes much to Plato's vision of education as a means of guiding individuals toward wisdom and virtue. One of the most enduring aspects of Plato's educational philosophy is the Socratic method, a teaching technique that Plato immortalized in his dialogues. Named after his teacher Socrates, this method involves asking students a series of probing questions designed to challenge their assumptions, stimulate critical thinking, and guide them toward deeper understanding. Rather than simply providing students with answers, the Socratic method encourages them to discover the answers for themselves through reflection and dialogue. This approach remains a cornerstone of modern education, particularly in disciplines like law, philosophy, and the humanities, where critical thinking and the ability to engage in reasoned debate are highly valued. Plato's influence can also be seen in modern discussions about the role of education in democracy. In the Republic, Plato was skeptical of democracy, fearing that it could lead to mob rule and the manipulation of the masses by demagogues. However, he also believed that education was the key to creating a just and stable society where individuals were able to govern themselves wisely. This idea that an educated populace is essential for the functioning of a healthy democracy remains central to modern democratic thought. In many democratic societies, public education is seen as a vital institution, one that equips citizens with the knowledge and skills they need to participate fully in civic life and make informed decisions about their government and society. Plato's vision of a well-rounded education, one that balances intellectual, moral, and physical development, has also had a lasting impact on educational systems. In the Republic, Plato advocated for an education that included not only philosophy and mathematics, but also physical training, music, and the arts. He believed that a balanced education was essential for the development of the whole person, ensuring that individuals were not only intellectually capable but also physically healthy and emotionally resilient. This holistic approach to education, where the mind, body, and soul are all nurtured, continues to influence modern educational practices, particularly in systems that emphasize the importance of physical education, the arts, and social-emotional learning. Today, Plato's legacy in education remains as strong as ever. His belief in the transformative power of education, his insistence on the moral and intellectual development of the individual, and his vision of a society guided by wisdom and virtue continue to inspire educators, students, and scholars around the world. Whether in the halls of universities, the classrooms of schools, or the broader discussions about the role of education in society, Plato's ideas remain a guiding light, reminding us that the pursuit of knowledge is not just about learning facts, but about shaping the soul and striving for a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world we live in. Though Plato lived centuries before the advent of modern psychology, his insights into the nature of the human mind, emotion, and behavior have left an indelible mark on the field. His exploration of the soul's structure, the struggle between reason and desire, and the importance of self-knowledge laid the groundwork for many of the ideas that would later shape psychology. In fact, Plato's influence extends beyond philosophy into our understanding of the mind and its development, with his concepts continuing to inform both therapeutic practices and theoretical frameworks in modern psychology. Central to Plato's exploration of the human mind is his belief that the soul is composed of three distinct parts: reason, spirit, and desire. In the Republic, Plato describes these parts as being in constant tension with one another, with reason representing the intellectual and rational aspect of the mind, spirit corresponding to courage and willpower, and desire encompassing the appetites and emotional impulses. Plato believed that the key to a well-functioning, virtuous life was to achieve a balance between these parts, with reason governing over the more impulsive elements of the soul. This idea of the divided self, where conflicting internal forces must be harmonized, would become a cornerstone of psychological thought, influencing everything from theories of personality to therapeutic practices. In many ways, Plato's vision of the soul mirrors the structure of the mind as conceived by modern psychologists. His idea that the rational mind must regulate emotional impulses and desires is echoed in Sigmund Freud's famous model of the ID, ego, and superego. Freud, often considered the father of psychoanalysis, proposed that the mind was divided into these three components: the ID, which represents primal desires and urges, the ego, which is the rational, decision-making part of the mind, and the superego, which embodies internalized societal norms and moral standards. Like Plato, Freud believed that mental health depended on achieving a balance between these competing forces, with the ego acting as a mediator between the often conflicting demands of the ID and the superego. While Freud's psychoanalytic theory may be the most direct modern parallel to Plato's tripartite soul, Plato's influence on psychology is not limited to this comparison. His exploration of self-awareness and self-knowledge as essential to a meaningful life also laid the groundwork for the development of therapeutic practices focused on introspection and personal growth. In the Apology, Plato famously quotes Socrates, who declared that the unexamined life is not worth living. For Plato, the pursuit of self-knowledge was central to both personal fulfillment and moral development. This emphasis on self-awareness as a path to mental well-being continues to resonate in modern therapeutic practices such as cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which encourages individuals to examine their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in order to gain insight into their mental processes and make positive changes. In the Republic, Plato's allegory of the cave serves as a powerful metaphor for the process of psychological enlightenment and growth. In the allegory, prisoners are chained inside a dark cave, able to see only the shadows of objects on the wall in front of them, cast by a fire behind them. For these prisoners, the shadows are the only reality they know. However, one prisoner is freed and, after a painful and disorienting journey, emerges into the sunlight outside the cave, where he is able to see the true world for the first time. Plato uses this allegory to illustrate the philosopher's journey toward knowledge, but it can also be understood as a metaphor for psychological growth, the process of breaking free from false beliefs and distorted perceptions, and gaining a clearer understanding of reality. In modern psychology, the allegory of the cave can be seen as a metaphor for cognitive distortions, where individuals hold irrational or unhelpful beliefs about themselves and the world. Cognitive behavioral therapy, in particular, focuses on helping individuals identify and challenge these distorted beliefs, much like a free prisoner who comes to understand that the shadows on the wall are not the true reality. By examining one's thoughts and gaining a more accurate understanding of the world, individuals can free themselves from mental and emotional chains, achieving greater clarity and well-being. Plato's ideas also anticipated modern discussions of emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize, understand, and manage emotions in oneself and others. In Phaedrus, Plato explores the concept of the soul as a charioteer, guiding two horses, one representing noble impulses and the other representing base desires. The charioteer's challenge is to control both horses, ensuring that they work together in harmony. This image of the charioteer struggling to balance competing emotional forces reflects the modern concept of emotional regulation, where individuals must navigate their emotions in a way that allows them to function effectively and maintain healthy relationships. Emotional intelligence, as discussed by psychologists like Daniel Goleman, is seen as a key factor in personal and professional success, and Plato's charioteer metaphor remains a vivid representation of the challenge of managing one's emotional life. In addition to his insights into the structure of the mind, Plato also made significant contributions to the field of moral psychology, the study of how people develop moral reasoning and ethical behavior. Plato believed that moral development was closely tied to intellectual development and that the pursuit of wisdom naturally led to a more virtuous life. This idea has influenced modern theories of moral development, such as those proposed by Lawrence Kohlberg, who argued that moral reasoning develops through a series of stages, beginning with a focus on external rewards and punishments and culminating in the recognition of universal ethical principles. Kohlberg's theory, like Plato's, suggests that individuals who achieve higher levels of intellectual and moral development are better equipped to make just and ethical decisions. Both Plato and Kohlberg viewed moral education as a process of guiding individuals toward greater understanding, helping them move beyond self-interest to embrace the principles of justice, fairness, and virtue. This idea remains central to modern discussions of moral education, where the goal is not just to teach students to follow rules, but to help them develop the capacity for ethical reasoning and moral judgment. Plato's influence on psychology also extends to his belief in the importance of holistic education, where intellectual, emotional, and physical development are all nurtured in order to create a well-rounded individual. In the Republic, Plato advocates for an education system that balances intellectual pursuits with physical exercise, music, and the arts, arguing that a harmonious mind requires a harmonious body. This holistic approach to education, which emphasizes the integration of mental, emotional, and physical well-being, continues to inform modern educational practices, particularly in discussions about the role of social-emotional learning in schools. Today, educators recognize that fostering emotional intelligence, resilience, and well-being is just as important as teaching academic skills, a view that can be traced back to Plato's vision of a balanced education. Finally, Plato's exploration of the unconscious mind and the role of dreams in shaping human behavior anticipated modern psychological theories about the influence of the unconscious. In dialogues such as Phaedo and Republic, Plato discusses how unconscious desires and impulses can shape our actions and beliefs, even if we are not fully aware of them. This idea that there are hidden forces at work in the mind would later become a central tenet of psychoanalysis, where Freud and his followers explored how unconscious thoughts, desires, and memories influence behavior. Plato's recognition of the complexity of the human mind and his belief that self-awareness is essential to understanding and controlling these hidden forces paved the way for later explorations of the unconscious in psychology. In the modern era, Plato's influence on psychology remains profound. His ideas about the structure of the mind, the importance of self-knowledge, and the pursuit of emotional and intellectual balance continue to inform both theoretical and practical approaches to mental health and development. Whether in the context of therapy, education, or personal growth, Plato's belief that the key to a meaningful life lies in understanding and harmonizing the different aspects of the self resonates just as strongly today as it did in ancient Greece. Plato's exploration of the human mind reminds us that the journey toward wisdom is not just an intellectual pursuit, but a deeply personal one, where the cultivation of reason, emotion, and virtue leads to a fuller understanding of both the self and the world. Plato's vision of society and social order, as laid out in the Republic, has been one of the most influential frameworks for understanding how communities can be structured to promote justice, harmony, and the common good. His belief that a well-ordered society must reflect the same balance and harmony that he envisioned within the individual's soul has inspired countless philosophers, politicians, and social reformers throughout history. For Plato, the health of a society was directly linked to the moral and intellectual development of its citizens, and this idea has profoundly shaped discussions about governance, community, and social responsibility. At the heart of Plato's philosophy is the notion of a just society, one where each individual plays a specific role that aligns with their natural talents and abilities. In the Republic, he outlines his vision of a tripartite society where the rulers, the philosopher kings, the warriors, the guardians, and the producers, the workers, each contribute to the overall harmony of the state. Just as the soul must be in balance, with reason guiding spirit and desire, so too must society be balanced, with wisdom guiding strength and productivity. For Plato, a society where each individual fulfills their proper role is one that fosters peace, prosperity, and justice for all. This idea of social harmony has had a lasting impact on how we think about community and the role of individuals within it. Plato's emphasis on the need for wise and virtuous rulers has been echoed in discussions about leadership and governance throughout history, from the Roman Republic to the development of modern democracies. His belief that society must be organized around the common good rather than individual self-interest remains a guiding principle in discussions about social justice, equality, and public service. Plato also believed that the stability of a society depended on the moral education of its citizens. In his view, education was not just about acquiring knowledge, but about shaping the character and values of individuals so that they could contribute positively to the community. This idea has had a profound influence on the development of public education systems around the world, where the goal is not just to prepare students for the workforce, but to cultivate informed, responsible citizens who are capable of contributing to the greater good. Plato's belief that education is essential to the well-being of society continues to inspire debates about the role of schools, universities, and other institutions in promoting civic engagement and social responsibility. Plato's vision of a meritocratic society, where individuals rise to positions of power and influence based on their abilities and virtues rather than their birth or wealth, has also influenced modern political systems. The idea that leaders should be chosen based on merit rather than privilege is central to the functioning of democratic institutions, where elections are intended to select the most capable individuals to govern. This emphasis on meritocracy, which was first articulated by Plato in the Republic, continues to shape our understanding of justice, fairness, and opportunity in contemporary society. Plato's impact on social thought extends beyond governance and education to include his ideas about the role of the individual in the community. For Plato, the well-being of the individual and the well-being of the community were inextricably linked. He believed that individuals could only achieve true happiness and fulfillment by living in harmony with others, contributing to the common good, and fulfilling their role in society. This idea that we are all part of a larger social fabric has resonated through the ages, influencing everything from the development of social contract theory to modern discussions about civic responsibility, environmental stewardship, and community service. Plato's vision of a just and harmonious society is ultimately a reflection of his larger philosophical project, the pursuit of truth, wisdom, and the good life. His belief that individuals and societies alike must strive for balance, justice, and moral excellence continues to inspire those who seek to build a better world, one where the common good is placed above individual gain, and where each person has the opportunity to contribute to the flourishing of the whole. As we come to the end of our journey through the life and ideas of Plato, we are reminded of the profound impact this ancient philosopher has had on the way we think about the world. From the deepest corners of our minds to the structure of our societies, Plato's influence continues to shape our understanding of justice, truth, and the human condition. His vision of a harmonious soul, a just society, and a life dedicated to the pursuit of wisdom remains as relevant today as it was over 2,000 years ago. Whether in politics, education, psychology, or art, Plato's ideas remind us that the search for knowledge, virtue, and the good life is a lifelong journey, one that challenges us to question, reflect, and grow. His works have inspired countless generations to look beyond the surface of things, to seek the eternal truths that lie beneath, and to strive for a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of Plato's timeless legacy. If you've enjoyed this journey and would like to continue exploring the lives and ideas of history's greatest thinkers, don't forget to follow Whispered Tales for more. Together, we'll uncover the mysteries of the past, one whisper at a time. Sweet dreams, whispered ones, and may your thoughts be filled with wisdom and wonder as you drift into the night.